The general's blood painted the sterile white floor in dark, spreading pools as his screams echoed through the corridors of Stone Ridge Memorial Hospital. His uniform was shredded, his chest a mess of shrapnel and tissue, and his voice, still commanding despite the agony, demanded one thing. "Get me your best surgeon, now!" The staff scrambled, terror in their eyes, because this wasn't just any patient. This was General Marcus Thorne, the man who controlled military contracts worth billions, the man senators feared, the man who ended careers with a phone call. When the operating room doors finally swung open, everyone expected Dr. Raymond Chen, the hospital's celebrated chief of surgery. Instead, a woman in faded scrubs walked in, her dark hair pulled back, her face unreadable. The general's heart monitor spiked, not from pain, but from recognition. His eyes widened. His breath caught, because the voice that spoke next, calm and cold as winter steel, was one he'd spent 7 years trying to forget. "If you want to live, General," Dr. Evelyn Ross said quietly, "you'll let go of my nurse." Before we dive into this story of justice, redemption, and the silent power of the underestimated, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end. Please like this video and comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The first sign that something was wrong came at 2:47 p.m. when the emergency bay doors burst open and 6 men in tactical gear swarmed into Stone Ridge Memorial's trauma center like they owned the place. They weren't paramedics. They weren't police. They moved with the precision of military contractors, their weapons visible, their faces hard, and between them on a blood-soaked gurney was a man whose uniform still bore 3 stars, despite being half destroyed by whatever had torn through his chest. "Civilian trauma bay! Now!" the lead contractor barked at the intake nurse, who nearly dropped her clipboard. "Presidential-level clearance. No questions, no records. Move!" The trauma center erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Raymond Chen, chief of surgery and the hospital's golden boy, appeared from his office looking annoyed at the disruption to his afternoon. He was in his late 40s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from a decade of medical awards and a waiting list of wealthy patients who paid premium rates for his attention. When he saw the general, though, his irritation transformed into opportunistic concern. "General Thorne," Chen said smoothly, already positioning himself at the bedside. "Sir, you're in excellent hands. I'll personally oversee your care." "Get out of my face," Thorne snarled, his voice surprisingly strong for a man with a sucking chest wound. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, still trying to command a room even as his life drained onto the floor. "I don't want oversight. I want your best trauma surgeon. I want the person who can put me back together when everyone else has given up." "Who is that?" Chen hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for everyone in the room to notice. "Sir, I assure you my qualifications—" "I didn't ask for your resume, doctor. I asked who's the best." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Chen's jaw tightened. Around the trauma bay, nurses exchanged glances. Everyone knew the answer. Everyone also knew that Chen would never admit it. Sarah Mendez, a senior trauma nurse who'd worked at Stone Ridge for 15 years, made the decision that would change everything. "Dr. Ross is our best trauma surgeon, sir," she said clearly. "She's handled more complex cases in the past year than anyone else in this hospital." Chen's head snapped toward her, his expression venomous. "Dr. Ross isn't available. I'm here." The voice came from the back of the trauma bay, near the supply closet where Evelyn had been restocking materials, the kind of menial work that Chen insisted she handle personally, even though it was typically an orderly's job. She stepped forward, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to recalibrate around her presence. Dr. Evelyn Ross was 41 years old and looked like someone who'd been broken and rebuilt from harder materials. She wasn't tall, wasn't imposing, didn't have Chen's polished presentation or his designer scrubs. Her surgical scrubs were standard hospital issue, worn soft from countless washes. Her hands bore small scars that spoke of work, not manicures. Her face was fine-boned but weathered, with lines around her eyes that suggested she'd seen things that left marks you couldn't photograph. But it was her eyes that made people look twice, dark, steady, and completely unreadable. They were the eyes of someone who'd made peace with ghosts. General Thorne stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. The color that remained in his face seemed to drain further. His breathing, already labored, became ragged. "You," he whispered. Evelyn's face showed nothing. "Me," she confirmed. She turned to Sarah. "Vitals?" "BP 70/40 and dropping, heart rate 140, respiratory rate 32, shallow and irregular. Suspected tension, pneumothorax, probable hemothorax, extensive shrapnel wounds to the chest and abdomen. He's been losing blood for at least 40 minutes. Get him to OR3, now." Evelyn's voice was calm, clinical, but it carried absolute authority. "I need 2 units O-neg on standby, chest tube kit ready, and someone call anesthesia. Tell them we're starting in 5 minutes, whether they're ready or not." "Dr. Ross," Chen interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I haven't authorized you to—" "Then authorize me or watch him die on this floor." Evelyn didn't even look at him. She was already moving to the gurney, her hands checking the general's wounds with quick, efficient precision. "His lung is collapsed. He's got internal bleeding. Every second we stand here debating politics is a second closer to irreversible shock. So either help or get out of the way." One of the contractors stepped forward, hand moving toward his sidearm. "You need to show some respect." Evelyn turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him stop. "Your boss is dying," she said quietly, "and the only person in this building who can save him is me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to back up. Dr. Chen is going to authorize this procedure, and then you're all going to wait outside while I work, because if any of you brings a weapon into my operating room, I walk, and you can explain to whoever comes next why General Marcus Thorne died because you couldn't follow basic hospital protocol." The silence was absolute. The contractor looked to Thorne, who managed a single jerky nod. Chen's face had gone red. "This is highly irregular. Authorize it or I quit," Evelyn said flatly. "Right here, right now. Right. You can explain to the board why you let a 3-star general die over a jurisdiction dispute." It was a bluff. Probably. But Chen couldn't risk calling it, not with witnesses, not with contractors who'd report back to whatever agency had sent them. "Fine," he bit out. "But I'm observing." "No, you're not." Evelyn was already moving toward the OR. "You haven't scrubbed trauma in 6 years, and I don't need you contaminating my field. Sarah, with me. Tom, get that chest tube kit. Someone page Dr. Winters from anesthesia and tell her it's code red." They moved as a unit, the trauma team falling into formation around Evelyn like soldiers who'd finally found their real commander. The gurney rolled toward the operating theater, leaving Chen standing in the middle of the trauma bay, his authority shattered, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. Inside her 3, Evelyn worked with the kind of focused intensity that made everything else disappear. The general was intubated, sedated, his chest cracked open to reveal the devastating damage. There were at least 7 distinct shrapnel wounds, 3 major vessels compromised, and his left lung was shredded like tissue paper. "Jesus," breathed Tom Martinez, the surgical assistant. "What the hell hit him?" "Classified explosion," one of the contractors said from just outside the OR window, his voice coming through the intercom. He hadn't left despite Evelyn's orders. "That's all you need to know." Evelyn ignored him. Her hands moved with practiced precision, tying off bleeders, removing fragments of metal, reconstructing tissue that looked beyond saving. She didn't talk much while she worked. No dramatic narration, no teaching moments. Just quiet concentration broken by terse instructions. Suction, more light here, tie that off, clamp. 2 hours became 3. 3 became 4. Sarah watched the monitors, calling out changes in vitals, adjusting medications, anticipating Evelyn's needs before she voiced them. They'd worked together for years, had developed the kind of wordless communication that came from shared experience in crisis after crisis. At the 4-hour mark, Evelyn finally stepped back from the table. The general's chest was closed, his vitals stable, his color better. He'd live, at least through the night. "Nice work, Doctor," Dr. Winters said from the anesthesia station. She was in her 60s, had been at Stone Ridge longer than anyone, and had seen enough to know that what Evelyn had just accomplished was something special. Most surgeons wouldn't have even attempted that repair. Evelyn stripped off her gloves, her face showing the first signs of exhaustion. Most surgeons haven't worked field hospitals, she said quietly. She didn't elaborate. She never did. The contractors were waiting when she emerged from the OR, still in her blood-soaked scrubs. Their leader, a man named Garrett, according to his name tag, approached with the kind of aggressive posture meant to intimidate. "The general wants to see you," he said. "The general is sedated and will be for the next 12 hours, Evelyn replied. "He's in ICU. You can see him during visiting hours tomorrow." "This isn't a request, doctor." "Yes, it is, because I'm the only surgeon in this hospital who can manage his post-op care, which means if you want him to survive the next 72 hours, you'll follow my protocols." She met his gaze without flinching. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to write orders and check on my other patients." She walked past him, and for a moment it looked like he might grab her arm. But something in the way she moved, the casual confidence of someone who'd been in worse situations than this, made him reconsider. In the doctor's lounge, Evelyn found Chen waiting, along with 2 members of the hospital's administrative board. They looked uncomfortable, which meant this wasn't going to be pleasant. "Dr. Ross," said Patricia Alvarez, the hospital's chief operating officer, "we need to discuss what happened today." Evelyn poured herself coffee, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash starting to set in. "What about it?" "You overstepped," Chen said, his voice sharp. "You contradicted my authority in front of patients and staff. You threatened to quit. You created a scene. I saved a man's life." "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." Evelyn turned to face them. "General Thorne was dying. You were worried about protocol and territory while he bled out. I made a decision. That's what trauma surgeons do." Alvarez looked pained. "Dr. Ross, we understand that, but there are proper channels. Dr. Chen is the chief of surgery. He has authority, then he should use it to save patients, not protect his ego." The room went cold. Chen stood up, his face flushed. "I've had enough of your insubordination. You work in this hospital at my discretion. You handle the cases I assign you. You follow the hierarchy." "I follow the Hippocratic Oath," Evelyn said quietly. "If that's a problem, fire me." It was the same bluff she'd used earlier, but this time it carried weight because everyone in the room knew the truth. Evelyn Ross was untouchable as long as General Thorne was in this hospital. Firing her would raise questions. Questions would lead to investigations, and investigations would reveal things that Chen had worked very hard to keep buried, like the fact that Evelyn handled twice the trauma caseload as any other surgeon, like the fact that her mortality rates were the lowest in the department, like the fact that Chen systematically took credit for her successes while burying her in menial tasks and administrative punishment. "We'll discuss this later," Alvarez said diplomatically. "For now, Dr. Ross, you'll continue to manage General Thorne's care, but this conversation isn't over." Evelyn nodded and left. She knew it wasn't over. It was never over. In the hallway, Sarah caught up with her. "You okay?" "I'm fine." That was incredibly brave, or incredibly stupid. I can't decide which. Evelyn managed a small, tired smile. "Can't it be both?" They walked together toward the ICU, where the general was being monitored around the clock. The contractors had set up a perimeter, treating the hospital wing like a military installation. It was excessive, paranoid, and told Evelyn that whoever had tried to kill Thorne wasn't finished yet. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. Make sure his IV lines are checked every hour, not just by the ICU nurses, by you personally. And if anyone tries to access his room who isn't on the authorized list, you call security immediately." Sarah's eyes widened. "You think someone's going to try again?" "I think people who plant bombs don't usually stop at one attempt." She said it casually, but her gut was churning with instinct born from years of military experience. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The classified nature of the injury, the excessive security, the way Thorne had looked at her when she walked into that trauma bay, like he'd seen a ghost. Because he had. At 11 p.m., exhausted and running on fumes, Evelyn finally checked on Thorne one last time before heading home. The ICU was dark except for the glow of monitors. The contractors had rotated shifts, new faces with the same hard expressions. Thorne was unconscious, stable, his chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. She stood at his bedside and looked at the face she hadn't seen in 7 years. He'd aged badly, more gray hair, deeper lines, the weight of command etched into every feature. He didn't look peaceful in sleep. He looked haunted. Good, she thought. He should be. Her hand moved to his chart, checking the latest vitals, the medication schedule, the post-op notes. Everything was as it should be. Everything was... The IV pump alarm went off. It was a soft sound, easily missed in the ambient noise of the ICU, but Evelyn's training kicked in immediately. She looked at the pump, then at the IV line, then at the bag hanging from the pole. The fluid was the wrong color, just slightly. Barely noticeable unless you knew what you were looking for. But Evelyn had spent years in combat hospitals where poisonings and sabotage were constant threats, and she knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. She hit the call button. I need crash cart to ICU 3 now. And get security up here immediately. She ripped the IV line out of Thorne's arm, clamped it off, and grabbed a syringe to draw a sample from the bag. Around her, the ICU erupted into motion. Nurses appeared, the contractors came running, and within seconds, Evelyn was at the center of a storm. What happened? Garrett demanded. Someone tampered with his IV, Evelyn said, her voice deadly calm. She held up the bag. This isn't normal saline. I don't know what it is yet, but it's contaminated. That's impossible. No one's been in this room except authorized personnel. Then one of your authorized personnel just tried to kill him. The words hung in the air like a grenade. Garrett's face went white. The other contractors reached for their weapons. And Thorne, still unconscious, still oblivious to how close he'd come to dying a second time, continued to breathe steadily on the bed between them. Evelyn moved fast. She started a new IV line with fresh fluids, checked his vitals, monitored for any signs of toxicity. Whatever had been in that bag hadn't had time to do serious damage. She'd caught it too quickly. But it had been meant to kill, slowly and quietly, mimicking post-operative complications. Lock down this wing, she ordered. No one in or out without being searched. And someone get that IV bag to the lab for analysis. I want to know exactly what was in it. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She'd just saved Thorne's life for the second time in one day. He got on his radio, barking orders, and within minutes the entire ICU was swarming with additional security. Chen appeared, summoned by the commotion. What the hell is going on? Assassination attempt, Evelyn said flatly. Someone inside this hospital tried to finish what the bomb started. Chen's face went ashen. That's insane. Our security failed, obviously. She turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made him take a step back. General Thorne stays in this ICU until we know he's safe. I want armed guards on this room 24/7. I want every staff member who's had access to him interviewed, and I want toxicology results on that IV bag within the hour. You can't just... I can and I am. Because if he dies in this hospital, we're all finished. Not just professionally. People will ask questions. Federal investigators will swarm this place. And every dirty secret, every cut corner, every administrative failure will come to light. She let that sink in. So unless you want that level of scrutiny, Dr. Chen, I suggest you let me do my job. He stared at her, something like fear flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded and walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with the unconscious general and the security team that had just failed catastrophically to protect him. Sarah reappeared with the lab results faster than should have been possible. It's potassium chloride, she said, her voice shaking. High concentration. If you hadn't caught it when you did, I know. Evelyn took the report, studied it. Potassium chloride pushed through an IV would cause cardiac arrest that could easily be mistaken for post-surgical complications. It was a clean kill, nearly untraceable, the kind of thing that required medical knowledge to execute properly, which meant the person who'd tampered with that bag knew exactly what they were doing. And they were still in this hospital. Evelyn looked up at the contractors, at the nurses, at the staff moving through the ICU. Any one of them could be the threat. Any one of them could be waiting for another opportunity. From now on, she said quietly, I'm the only person who touches his medications. I'll prepare them personally, I'll administer them personally, and I'll monitor him personally. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with federal investigators when they arrive to ask why we let a 3-star general get murdered in our ICU. No one argued. At 3 a.m., sitting in a chair beside Thorne's bed while the contractors patrolled outside, Evelyn finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what was happening. 7 years ago, this man had destroyed her life with a lie, had watched her get court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, stripped of everything she'd worked for, had sent her into civilian life with a record that made it nearly impossible to find work, to rebuild, to ever be trusted again. She'd survived by sheer stubbornness. Medical school again, civilian credentials, clawing her way up from nothing. Stonebridge Memorial had hired her only because they were desperate for trauma surgeons, and because she'd been willing to work for half the salary of anyone with her qualifications. Chen had made her life hell ever since, punishing her for being better than him, for making him look inadequate by comparison. And now, by some cosmic joke, she was the only thing standing between Marcus Thorne and death. She should hate him. Part of her did. But another part, the part that had taken an oath, the part that had spent years in war zones saving people who didn't deserve it, couldn't let him die. Not like this. Not without answers. Why were you so afraid when you saw me? She asked the unconscious man. What do you know that scares you more than dying? He didn't answer. The monitors beeped steadily. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Millbrook City, bringing a new day and whatever threats it might contain. Evelyn pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been avoiding for 7 years. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, rough with sleep and surprise. Captain Ross, is that really you? Not captain anymore, Jake, she said quietly, and I need a favor. Ensang document. 10:09. Jake Moreno arrived at Stonebridge Memorial just after sunrise, looking exactly as Evelyn remembered him, compact, muscular, with the kind of alertness that never quite left career military personnel even years after discharge. He'd been her platoon sergeant in Afghanistan, had watched her back through 17 months of hell, and had testified on her behalf during the court-martial. It hadn't mattered. The fix had been in from the beginning. They met in the hospital cafeteria, which was nearly empty at this hour. Jake took one look at her face and swore quietly. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Try 24 hours. Evelyn pushed a cup of coffee across the table toward him. Thanks for coming. You said it was urgent, and after 7 years of radio silence, I figured it had to be. He sat down, his eyes scanning the room with practiced caution. What's going on, Doc? She told him everything, the general's arrival, the surgery, the assassination attempt. She watched his expression shift from surprise to recognition to something darker and more dangerous. Marcus Thorne, he said finally. That's who you saved? Twice now. Jesus Christ, Evelyn. Do you know what you're in the middle of? No, that's why I called you. Because 7 years ago, Thorne watched me get destroyed over something that should have ended my career in commendations, not a dishonorable discharge. And when he saw me yesterday, he looked terrified, not surprised. Terrified. Like he'd been expecting this moment and dreading it. Jake pulled out his phone, checked something, then put it away. There are rumors, he said quietly. About Thorne. About why he's been moving up the chain so fast, despite being, let's be honest, mediocre at his job. Word is he's connected to Meridian Defense Solutions. They're a private military contractor, huge Pentagon connections, billions in contracts. There was an investigation about 18 months ago into procurement fraud, but it got buried. Buried how? The kind of buried that requires senators making phone calls. The kind that means people in very high places wanted it to disappear. He leaned forward. If someone tried to kill Thorne with a bomb, and then again in your hospital, it's because he knows something worth killing for. Evelyn felt pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. I need to know what happened 7 years ago. The real story, not the official version. You were there. You know what happened. I know what I saw. I don't know why it was covered up or why Thorne personally made sure I took the fall. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice was careful. There were 23 civilians in that compound, women, children, elderly. The intelligence said it was a Taliban weapons cache. Thorne ordered the airstrike. You refused to evacuate the medical team, said you'd confirmed there were no weapons, only people. He ordered you to leave anyway. You stayed. And the airstrike was called off at the last second, Evelyn finished. Because I was right. There were no weapons, just families. Yeah, and that made Thorne look incompetent, made the intelligence look faulty, made a lot of people very uncomfortable. So the narrative changed. Suddenly you were the problem. Insubordinate, emotionally unstable, putting your team at risk with your refusal to follow orders. Jake's jaw tightened. They buried the truth and buried you with it. Who's they? That's what I never figured out, but it was bigger than Thorne. He was just the face of it. A page came over the hospital intercom, calling for Dr. Ross to return to the ICU. Evelyn stood, and Jake stood with her. I'm staying, he said. Whatever this is, you're going to need backup. This isn't your fight, Jake. The hell it isn't. They screwed you over, and I couldn't stop it. Maybe I can help now. His expression softened slightly. Besides, you saved my ass in Kandahar. Figure I owe you one. Back in the ICU, Thorne was awake. Barely. His eyes were clouded with pain medication, but when Evelyn entered the room, they focused on her with disturbing clarity. You, he rasped through dry lips. Still alive. Still alive, she confirmed. She checked his vitals, adjusted his IV, the new, uncontaminated one, and made notes on his chart. You're stable. The surgery went well. If you follow post-op protocols, you'll make a full recovery. Someone tried to kill me. In your hospital. Yes. And you stopped them. Yes. He stared at her, and she could see him trying to process this through the fog of medication and trauma. Why? It was such a simple question, but loaded with everything that stood between them. Evelyn could have said, because it's my job. Could have said, because I took an oath. Could have thrown his own betrayal in his face and demanded answers. Instead, she said, because unlike you, General, I don't let people die when I can save them, even people who don't deserve it. Something flickered across his face, shame, maybe, or fear. You don't understand what you're involved in. Then explain it to me. I can't. His voice was barely a whisper. If I do, they'll kill you too. They're already trying to kill you. Successfully, I might add, if I hadn't caught that contaminated IV. So whatever you're protecting, it's not working. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. 7 years ago, you destroyed my life. You watched me get court-martialed for doing the right thing. You stood there and said nothing while they stripped my rank, my career, everything I'd worked for. I want to know why. Thorne closed his eyes. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when they threaten your family. Not when they have photographs of your daughter at school, your wife at the grocery store, and they tell you exactly how creative they can get with making deaths look like accidents. His eyes opened again, and they were haunted. I was a coward. I sold you out to protect my own, and I've regretted it every day since. The confession hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness, but understanding. She'd seen enough in combat to know that moral certainty was a luxury most people couldn't afford. She'd also seen enough to know that selling someone else's life for your own comfort was still a choice, regardless of the justification. Who threatened you? Meridian Defense Solutions. Specifically, a man named David Castellan. He runs their security division. He's the one who buries problems. Thorne's breathing was getting labored. The civilians in that compound, they weren't random. One of them was related to an Afghan politician who was investigating Meridian's contract irregularities. The intelligence was manufactured. The airstrike was meant to look like collateral damage. When you stopped it, you became a problem. So they made me disappear. Castellan said if I didn't cooperate, my family would have an accident. He showed me files, surveillance photos, school schedules, medical records. He knew everything. Thorne's voice cracked. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just telling you what happened. Evelyn processed this. Why are they trying to kill you now? Because I'm done. I told the Inspector General 2 weeks ago that I'd testify about the procurement fraud. I have evidence, documents, communications, proof that Meridian's been bribing officials and falsifying reports for years. They've been billing the Pentagon for equipment that doesn't exist, services that were never rendered. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. He coughed, wincing with pain. The bomb was their first attempt. The IV was their second. There'll be a third. Not if I can help it. You can't fight them, Doctor. They have resources you can't imagine. They've killed people for far less than what I know, and now that you're involved, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. You need to let me die. It's the only way you'll be safe. Evelyn pulled her hand away. I don't abandon patients, General, not even ones who abandoned me. She left the room before he could respond. Outside, Garrett was waiting with 3 other contractors. Their body language had shifted, less protective, more predatory. We need to move the General, Garrett said without preamble, to a secure military facility. He's not stable enough for transport, another 24 hours minimum. That's not acceptable. That's medicine. You can't negotiate with physiology. Evelyn crossed her arms. He stays here until I clear him. Garrett stepped closer, dropping his voice. Dr. Ross, I don't think you understand the situation. There are national security considerations. I understand perfectly. Someone tried to blow up your boss and then poison him in my ICU. Until I know he's safe and stable, he's not going anywhere. She met his gaze without flinching. Now, are you going to help me protect him, or are you part of the problem? The accusation was deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction. Garrett's face darkened. That's a serious allegation. Someone got past your security to tamper with that IV. Either you're incompetent or you're compromised. I'm betting on the latter. For a moment, she thought he might actually hit her. His hand twitched toward his sidearm. But before he could move, Jake appeared from around the corner, his own body language radiating controlled violence. Problem here, Doc? He asked casually. Garrett looked between them, calculating. Then he stepped back. This conversation isn't over. Yes, it is, Evelyn said. Unless you want me to call the FBI and explain how a patient under federal protection nearly got murdered on your watch. He left, but the threat in his departure was palpable. Jake waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. You're making enemies fast. I have a gift. Evelyn rubbed her temples, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her. I need you to do something for me. Find out everything you can about David Castellan and Meridian Defense Solutions. Quietly. And check if there's anyone else from our old unit still around, people we can trust. You think this is going to get worse? I know it is. She was right. At noon, the hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Arthur Brennan, summoned her to his office. He was a portly man in his 60s, more administrator than physician, the type who valued hospital rankings and donor relationships over actual patient care. When Evelyn entered, she found him sitting behind his desk with Chen and 2 people she didn't recognize, a man and a woman in expensive suits that screamed federal law enforcement. Dr. Ross, Brennan said, his tone icy. These are Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the FBI. They'd like to ask you some questions about General Thorne. The agents stood. Morrison was tall, African-American, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Chen was Chinese-American, smaller, but with the same predatory focus. They showed their credentials, which Evelyn examined carefully before nodding. Questions about what? About the general's medical condition, Morrison said, and about the alleged poisoning attempt last night. Alleged? Evelyn repeated. I have toxicology reports showing potassium chloride in concentrations that would have caused cardiac arrest. There's nothing alleged about it. We've reviewed those reports, Agent Chen said. The concentration was high, yes, but not necessarily fatal. It could have been a mistake, wrong medication bag, clerical error. With respect, Agent, I know the difference between a clerical error and attempted murder. That IV was deliberately contaminated. Morrison pulled out a small notebook. Doctor, we understand you have a personal history with General Thorne. Is it possible that your judgment is being affected by that history? The implication was clear and offensive. Evelyn felt her temper rising but kept her voice level. My personal history with the general is irrelevant to the medical facts. Someone tried to kill him. If you're not investigating that, then you're either incompetent or complicit. Dr. Ross. Brennan's face flushed. You will not speak to federal agents that way. Why are you here? Evelyn interrupted, looking directly at Morrison. The general arrives with injuries from a classified explosion, surrounded by private contractors instead of military police. He's nearly murdered in our ICU. And instead of investigating Meridian Defense Solutions or David Castellan, you're questioning me. That tells me either you're not really FBI or you're on someone's payroll. The room went silent. Agent Chen's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. So is attempted murder. Evelyn stood. Now, unless you're charging me with something, I have patients to attend to, including General Thorne, who remains under my care regardless of how uncomfortable that makes people. Sit down, Doctor, Morrison said, and there was steel in his voice now. We're not finished. Yes, we are. Because I'm not answering questions without my attorney present, and I'm certainly not being interrogated by agents who seem more interested in protecting the people who tried to kill my patient than in finding out who they are. She walked to the door. If you want to talk again, call my lawyer. Otherwise, stay out of my way. She left before they could respond, her heart hammering but her expression calm. Behind her, she could hear Brennan sputtering apologies, Chen saying something venomous. She didn't care. They'd shown their hand. This wasn't a legitimate investigation. It was intimidation. Jake was waiting in the hallway. That sounded fun. They're trying to bury this, just like they buried Afghanistan. Evelyn pulled him into an empty consultation room. What did you find? David Castellan, 47 years old, former Delta Force, joined Meridian 15 years ago and built their security division from nothing. His official job is protecting company assets. His unofficial job is making problems disappear. Jake pulled up information on his phone. He's been linked to at least 5 suspicious deaths, whistleblowers, investigators, journalists. Nothing proven, everything circumstantial. The guy's a ghost. Is he in Millbrook City? Don't know yet. But if Thorne's testimony threatens Meridian's contracts, Castellan will come personally to clean it up. Jake's expression was grim. Evelyn, this is bigger than we can handle. You should call real FBI, real investigators. Those were real FBI agents. They're just bought. She paced the small room, thinking. Thorne said he gave evidence to the Inspector General. If he dies before testifying, that evidence might disappear. We need to find out what he has and where it's stored. You want to steal classified documents from a 3-star general? I want to make sure they don't disappear with him when Castellan makes his next move. She checked her watch. Thorne will be lucid again in a few hours when the medication wears down. I'll talk to him then. But at 4 p.m., everything changed. Evelyn was reviewing labs in the doctor's lounge when the fire alarm went off. Not the drill tone, but the real emergency alert. Within seconds, her pager exploded with messages. Fire in the administrative wing, smoke in the corridors, evacuation protocols initiated. She ran toward the ICU. If this was another attempt on Thorne, they'd use the chaos as cover. The hallways were filling with smoke. Not thick enough to be dangerous yet, but enough to reduce visibility and trigger panic. Staff were evacuating patients, moving gurneys toward the stairwells, following emergency procedures. The ICU was in controlled chaos. Sarah was there, already organizing the evacuation of critical patients. We need to move everyone, she said when she saw Evelyn. The fire's spreading from the administrative wing. Where's Thorne? Still in his room. The contractors said they'd handle it. Evelyn didn't wait to hear more. She sprinted to Thorne's room and found it empty. The monitors were disconnected, the IV pole knocked over, and the general was gone. No contractors in sight. No guards. Just an empty room and the smell of smoke growing stronger. No, no, no! She ran back into the hallway. Sarah, did you see where they took Thorne? I assumed they evacuated him with the others, but he wasn't with the other patients. Evelyn checked the evacuation staging areas, the emergency stairwells, the ambulance bay. No sign of the general or his security team. They'd used the fire as cover to move him, and now he was somewhere in this hospital, vulnerable and alone. Or worse, they'd used the fire as cover to finish the job. Jake appeared through the smoke, coughing. Fire department's here. They're saying it's arson, accelerant detected in 3 different locations. This was deliberate. They took Thorne. The contractors took him. And I don't know where. Evelyn grabbed his arm. We need to find him before Castellan does. They split up, searching different wings. The hospital was a maze at the best of times, and with smoke obscuring visibility and alarms drowning out communication, it was nearly impossible to navigate. Evelyn checked empty patient rooms, storage closets, imaging suites. Nothing. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Voices arguing, muffled by distance and smoke. She followed the sound down a service corridor toward the maintenance area, Jake appearing beside her moments later. The voices were coming from the old radiology wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed for renovations. Evelyn approached carefully, staying low, using the smoke as concealment. Through a partially open door, she could see 3 figures, Garrett and 2 other contractors, with Thorne on a gurney between them. He was conscious, struggling weakly against restraints. Supposed to look like he died in the fire, Garrett was saying into his phone. Castellan's orders. Make it clean. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She looked at Jake, who had already pulled out his phone to call for help. But before either of them could move, one of the contractors spotted them. We've got company! Everything happened at once. Garrett dropped his phone and reached for his weapon. Evelyn lunged forward, not toward the contractors, but toward Thorne's gurney, putting herself between them and the general. Jake moved with trained precision, intercepting the nearest contractor with a strike that sent the man crashing into medical equipment. Get him out of here, Jake shouted, engaging the second contractor. Evelyn released Thorne's restraints and tried to push the gurney toward the exit, but Garrett blocked her path. He hadn't drawn his weapon yet. Couldn't, not without risking charges that even Castellan couldn't bury. But his body language said he was done playing by rules. Step away from the general, doctor. No. This is bigger than you. You can't win. Maybe not, but I can make enough noise that your boss can't sweep it under the rug. She kept her hands on the gurney, her stance defensive. There are cameras in this hospital. Staff who saw you move him. Jake's already called this in. If you kill us now, it's murder. Not collateral damage, not an accident, murder. Garrett hesitated, calculating. Behind him, Jake had subdued one contractor and was grappling with the second. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the smoke. Fire department, police, real help arriving. This isn't over, Garrett said. He grabbed his fallen phone and retreated, dragging his injured colleague with him. Within seconds, they were gone, disappearing into the smoke like they'd never been there. Evelyn sagged against the gurney, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Thorne looked up at her, his face gray with pain and shock. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet. We're not safe. She started pushing the gurney toward the exit, Jake falling in beside her. We need to get you somewhere secure, somewhere they can't reach. There's nowhere they can't reach. Then we'll have to make somewhere. Evelyn's mind was racing, putting pieces together. The evidence you gave the Inspector General, where is it? Safe deposit box, keys in my quarters at Fort Meridian. Can anyone else access it? My attorney. But Castellan will know to look there. Thorne coughed, the movement making him wince. You need to understand, Meridian has connections everywhere. Military, intelligence, law enforcement. That's how they've survived this long. They own people. They don't own me. They emerged from the smoke into the hospital's main corridor, where firefighters were working to contain the blaze. Paramedics rushed forward to check Thorne, and Evelyn briefed them quickly on his condition. Within minutes, he was being loaded into an ambulance under the watchful eyes of actual police officers, not Meridian contractors. Evelyn turned to Jake. We need to get that evidence before they do. Fort Meridian is a military base. We can't just walk in and... You still have your military ID. Yeah, but it's retired status. I can't access secured areas. But you can get on base, and I'm Thorne's attending physician. I have legitimate reason to retrieve personal effects on his behalf. She was making this up as she went, running on instinct and desperation. We go tonight, before they realize what we're doing. Jake stared at her. You're insane. Probably. Are you in? He sighed. I'm definitely going to regret this. But yeah, I'm in. As the ambulance pulled away with Thorne, Evelyn watched the smoke still rising from the administrative wing and knew they'd crossed a point of no return. Castellan would know by now that his assassination attempt had failed again. He'd know that Evelyn was actively protecting Thorne, and he'd escalate, which meant they had maybe 12 hours before things got much, much worse. Sarah appeared beside her, soot-stained and exhausted. Is he okay? For now. Evelyn put a hand on her shoulder. Thank you for everything. What happens next? That was the question, wasn't it? Evelyn looked at the chaos around them. Firefighters working, patients being relocated, staff trying to restore order. Somewhere in this mess, Castellan was watching, planning his next move. The fire had been arson. The contractors had tried to kill Thorne during the evacuation. And now federal agents, real or bought, were involved. She thought about Afghanistan, about the compound full of civilians she'd refused to abandon, about the court-martial and the discharge and the 7 years of rebuilding from nothing. She thought about Thorne's confession, his regret, his cowardice, and she thought about the 23 people in that compound who were alive today because she'd refused to follow orders. What happens next, Evelyn said quietly, is we fight back. At 8 p.m., she and Jake left for Fort Meridian in his truck. The base was 40 minutes outside Millbrook City, and the drive gave them time to plan. Jake had made calls to old contacts, people from their unit who were still active duty. 2 of them agreed to help. Lieutenant Marcus Webb and Sergeant First Class Diana Torres, both stationed at Meridian. They'll meet us at the base exchange at 2100, Jake said, eyes on the road. Webb can get us into the officers' quarters. Torres will run interference if anyone asks questions. What did you tell them? That we're trying to help Thorne, that there's a threat, that we need their trust. He glanced at her. They remember Afghanistan. They remember what happened to you. They'll help. Fort Meridian sprawled across 3,000 acres of Oklahoma plains, all chain-link fences and concrete buildings designed for function over aesthetics. Jake's retired military ID got them through the gate without issue, and they drove to the base exchange as instructed. Webb and Torres were waiting in civilian clothes, looking nervous but determined. Evelyn knew them both by reputation. Solid soldiers, good people. They'd both given statements during her court-martial, trying to defend her. Like everyone else, they'd been ignored. Captain Ross, Webb said, then corrected himself. Sorry, Dr. Ross? Evelyn's fine. She shook their hands. Thank you for doing this. Thank Thorne for finally growing a conscience, Torres said. Her voice was hard. We knew the airstrike intel was garbage. We knew you were right, and we watched them destroy you for it. The 4 of them moved quickly through the base, using Torres's access to reach the senior officers' housing area. Thorne's quarters were in a corner unit, dark and empty. Webb picked the lock with practiced efficiency, and they slipped inside. The apartment was Spartan, military precision, few personal touches. Evelyn went straight for the bedroom while the others kept watch. She found Thorne's personal safe in the closet, exactly where he'd said it would be. The combination he'd given her before the ambulance left worked on the first try. Inside was a manila envelope, a passport, and a small safety deposit box key. Evelyn grabbed all 3. The envelope contained copies of documents, procurement records, communications, financial statements. She scanned them quickly, her medical training making her adept at processing complex information rapidly. What she saw made her stomach turn. Meridian Defense Solutions had been systematically defrauding the Pentagon for at least 8 years. Phantom contracts, inflated invoices, kickbacks to military procurement officers. The total amount was staggering, over $400 million. And the names implicated weren't just Castellan. There were senators, generals, Defense Department officials. This is enough to bring down half the Pentagon, she breathed. Which is why they'll kill anyone who has it, Jake said from the doorway. We need to go. Now. They left the apartment exactly as they'd found it and made it back to Jake's truck without incident. But as they drove toward the gate, Torres's phone buzzed with an alert. Security's been notified of a break-in at Thorne's quarters, she said, her voice tight. Base is going to lock down protocol. You've got maybe 2 minutes to get out. Jake floored it. The gate was just ahead, and the guard hadn't been notified yet. They waved him through with barely a glance. As soon as they were clear of the base, Jake took a series of random turns, making sure they weren't followed. Where to now? He asked. Evelyn clutched the envelope to her chest. Somewhere we can make copies. Somewhere we can get this information to people Castellan doesn't own. She thought about the FBI agents who'd questioned her, about Chen's vendetta, about Brennan's spineless administration. We need someone with real power, someone with nothing to lose. I might know someone, Torres said from the back seat. Investigative journalist, works for the Washington Standard. She's been trying to expose defense contractor fraud for years. Can't get sources because everyone's too scared to talk. Will she protect us? If the story's big enough, she'll protect you with her life. This is exactly what she's been waiting for. Evelyn made the decision. Set up a meeting. Tomorrow. Tell her we have everything she needs. They dropped Webb and Torres at a neutral location and continued driving. Jake found a 24-hour copy center where Evelyn made multiple sets of the documents, storing them in different locations. One set went to a lawyer Jake knew. One set went into a safe deposit box at a bank. One set stayed with them. By the time they made it back to Millbrook City, it was after midnight. Evelyn checked her phone and found 17 missed calls from the hospital, 3 from unknown numbers, and 1 text message from a blocked number that made her blood run cold. You have something that belongs to us, Dr. Ross. Return it by noon tomorrow, or people you care about start dying. Starting with Sarah Mendez. DC. David Castellan. Evelyn showed the message to Jake, whose face went hard. He's bluffing. Is he? She thought about Sarah, who'd been nothing but kind and supportive, about the other nurses, about the patients still in Stone Ridge Memorial. He burned down part of the hospital to get to Thorne. You think he'll hesitate to go after someone I care about? So what do we do? Evelyn looked at the copies of documents in her lap, at the evidence that could bring down Meridian and everyone connected to it. She thought about Thorne's cowardice 7 years ago, about how he'd chosen his family over her life. She understood it now in a way she hadn't before. But understanding didn't mean she'd make the same choice. We finish this, she said quietly. Tonight, before he can hurt anyone else. How? She pulled up the journalist's contact information that Torres had sent. We make this public, right now. We send everything to every media outlet we can think of. We put it online. We make it impossible to bury. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. And then we go back to the hospital and we protect Sarah and everyone else until help arrives. Castellan will come for us. I know. He'll bring everything he has. I know that too. Evelyn met his eyes. But I'm done running. I'm done letting powerful people destroy lives because it's convenient. 7 years ago, I did the right thing and paid for it. Tonight, I'm going to do the right thing again. And this time, I'm making sure the truth can't be buried. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, let's burn their house down. They spent the next 2 hours uploading documents to secure servers, emailing journalists, posting to whistleblower sites. By 3 a.m., the evidence was everywhere, too distributed to contain, too public to deny. Evelyn's phone started ringing almost immediately with reporters wanting confirmation, but she ignored them all. Instead, she called Sarah. Dr. Ross, what's going on? There are men outside my apartment. Lock your doors, call the police. Tell them you're being threatened by private military contractors from Meridian Defense Solutions, and that you need immediate protection. Evelyn kept her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. Tell them it's connected to the attempted murder of General Marcus Thorne and that evidence has just been released to the press. I don't understand. You will soon. Just trust me. And Sarah? I'm sorry you got dragged into this. She hung up and called the hospital next, speaking directly to the night supervisor. This is Dr. Ross. You need to increase security immediately. There may be an attempt to access the hospital by armed individuals claiming to be contractors. Do not let anyone in who isn't law enforcement with proper identification. If anyone threatens staff, call the FBI field office directly. Not the agents who questioned me earlier, but the actual field office. Tell them it's related to the Meridian defense documents that just went public. The supervisor sounded confused but agreed to follow her instructions. Evelyn hung up and looked at Jake. Now what? Now we go back to Stone Ridge and we wait for Castellan to make his move. Because he will. And when he does, we need to be ready. They drove back to the hospital as dawn began to break over Millbrook City. The administrative wing was still damaged from the fire, but the rest of the facility was operational. News vans were starting to gather outside. Word of the document release was spreading fast. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Security had been tripled. Police were stationed at all entrances. And in the ICU, where Thorne had been moved back after his evacuation, armed federal marshals now stood guard instead of Meridian contractors. Real protection at last. Evelyn found Thorne awake, watching the news on the television mounted to his wall. Coverage of the document release was everywhere. Major networks, cable news, online media. Meridian stock was plummeting. Senators were calling for investigations. The Pentagon had issued a terse statement about taking the allegations seriously. "You did it," Thorne said when he saw her. "You actually did it. I made the evidence public. What happens next is up to investigators and prosecutors." She checked his vitals, professional despite everything. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified, relieved, guilty." He looked at her. "I should have done this 7 years ago. I should have protected you instead of protecting myself." "Yes, you should have." Evelyn didn't soften it. "But you're doing it now. That has to count for something." "Will you testify when this goes to trial?" "If they need me to, yes. They'll come after you. Castellan doesn't give up. Let him come." Evelyn set down his chart. "I'm not the scared military doctor they destroyed anymore. I've survived 7 years of being treated like I was worth nothing. I've rebuilt my life from pieces. And I'm done being afraid of powerful men who think they can make people disappear." Thorne smiled slightly. "I believe you." She left him to rest and found Jake in the cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee and monitoring news feeds on his phone. "It's working," he said. "Justice Department just announced a formal investigation. FBI, the real FBI, is opening cases. Meridian's offices are being raided." "Any sign of Castellan?" "Nothing yet, but he's out there." Jake looked up at her. "You know he's not going to let this go, even with the evidence public, even with investigations starting. He'll want revenge. Then he can get in line." Evelyn sat down across from him, exhaustion finally catching up. "I'm not backing down, Jake. Not this time." "I know. That's what worries me." They sat in silence for a moment, two survivors of a war that had followed them home, waiting for the final battle to begin. Outside, the sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot. And somewhere in those shadows, David Castellan was watching, planning, preparing to make his move against the woman who'd just destroyed everything he'd built. The question wasn't if he'd come. The question was whether Evelyn would survive when he did. Castellan arrived at noon, exactly when his deadline expired. Evelyn saw him on the security cameras before he even entered the building. A lean man in his late 40s with silver-streaked hair and the predatory stillness of someone who'd spent decades hunting human targets. He wore an expensive suit and carried no visible weapons, but everything about his posture screamed danger. Two men flanked him, also in suits, also radiating controlled violence. They walked straight past the police officers at the entrance, flashing credentials that made the cops step aside immediately. Whatever identification Castellan carried, it opened doors that local law enforcement couldn't close. "He's here," Evelyn said quietly into her phone. Jake was 2 floors down, positioned near the emergency stairs with Torres and Webb, who'd driven up from Fort Meridian when they heard what was happening. 3 of them, coming up to the ICU. "We're ready," Jake replied. "But Evelyn, if he's got federal credentials, I know. Just be ready to move if this goes sideways." She pocketed the phone and walked out to meet Castellan in the hallway outside Thorne's room. The federal marshals straightened when they saw him approach, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons, but Castellan held up a badge that made them hesitate. "Defense Intelligence Agency," he said smoothly. "I'm here to speak with General Thorne regarding a classified matter. You can verify my credentials if you'd like." The senior marshal, a woman named Rodriguez, looked uncertain. "Sir, we have orders that no one accesses the general without proper authorization." "I have authorization from the Secretary of Defense himself." Castellan's voice was pleasant, reasonable, completely at odds with the cold calculation in his eyes. "But if you'd prefer to call your supervisor and explain why you delayed a DIA investigation into matters of national security, please, be my guest." Rodriguez wavered. Evelyn could see her trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze, trying to figure out which orders trumped which. It was exactly the confusion Castellan had counted on. "He's not DIA," Evelyn said clearly. "He's David Castellan, head of security for Meridian Defense Solutions, the same company currently being raided by actual federal agents, and he's here to silence General Thorne before he can testify." Castellan turned to look at her, and for a moment his pleasant mask slipped. What showed underneath was reptilian. Dr. Ross, I've heard a great deal about you, including the fact that you stole classified documents from a military installation last night. I retrieved personal effects on behalf of my patient, and those documents are no longer classified. They're evidence of criminal activity that's now in the hands of the Justice Department, the Washington Standard, and about 30 other news organizations. She crossed her arms. So whatever authority you're pretending to have, it doesn't matter. The evidence is public. The investigation is launched. You've lost. Have I? Castellan smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. Dr. Ross, I've been making problems disappear for 15 years. Do you really think some leaked documents will stop me? Within a week, those documents will be discredited. The journalists will be sued into silence. The investigation will quietly die, and everyone involved in this embarrassing episode will face consequences. He took a step closer. Starting with you. Rodriguez moved to intercede. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. One of Castellan's men moved with blinding speed, drawing a weapon and pressing it against Rodriguez's temple before anyone could react. The other marshal reached for his gun, but Castellan's second operative already had him covered. Let's not make this difficult, Castellan said, his voice still pleasant. My men and I are going to have a conversation with General Thorne. Dr. Ross will join us. And these brave marshals will stay very still and very quiet, because if they don't, we'll find out how bulletproof federal protection really is. Evelyn's mind raced. The ICU was full of patients, nurses, vulnerable people who couldn't be caught in crossfire. Castellan had chosen his moment perfectly, public enough that he could claim authority, isolated enough that he could use force if needed. Let them go, she said. I'll come with you. Just let them go. Evelyn, no, Rodriguez started, but Castellan's man pressed the gun harder against her skull. Smart choice, Doctor. Castellan gestured toward Thorne's room. After you. Evelyn walked into the room with Castellan right behind her. Thorne was awake, still weak, but his eyes sharpened with fear when he saw who'd entered. One of Castellan's men secured the door while the other kept his weapon trained on the marshals outside. Hello, Marcus, Castellan said conversationally. You've been a very busy boy, talking to inspectors, hiding evidence, making promises about testimony. He pulled up a chair and sat down like he was visiting an old friend. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? The evidence is already public, Thorne said, his voice hoarse. You can't stop it. Can I? Marcus, you of all people should know how this works. The news cycle moves fast. In 3 days, there'll be another scandal, another crisis. People will forget. And the individuals who actually matter, the senators, the generals, the procurement officers, they'll remember that I protect my friends and destroy my enemies. He glanced at Evelyn. Dr. Ross here thinks she's won. She's released documents, involved journalists, made noise. All she's really done is put herself on a very short list. Touch her and you prove everything she's saying, Thorne said. You can't make us both disappear. Watch me. That's... Castellan pulled out his phone. I have teams positioned at 12 different locations around Millbrook City, Dr. Ross's apartment, Sarah Mendez's home, Jake Moreno's address, every person who's helped you, every person who knows what you know. He showed them the screen, surveillance photos of people they cared about, time-stamped from this morning. One phone call, and they all have tragic accidents, gas leaks, car crashes, home invasions gone wrong. Choose. Evelyn felt ice spread through her veins. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus knows I'm not. Don't you, Marcus? Remember what I showed you 7 years ago? Your daughter's school schedule? Your wife's jogging route? Castellan's smile widened. I kept those files, by the way. Updated them regularly. Your daughter's married now, living in Boston with a husband and a 3-year-old son. Beautiful family. Would be a shame if something happened to them. Thorne's face went gray. You said if I cooperated, they'd be safe. I lied. But then, so did you when you promised not to talk. Castellan stood. Here's what's going to happen. Dr. Ross is going to issue a public statement saying the documents were fabricated, that she was mistaken, that this was all a misunderstanding. General Thorne is going to recant his testimony to the Inspector General, and both of you are going to disappear quietly, early retirement, medical leave, whatever story we decide to tell. You do this, and the people you care about stay safe. You refuse, and I make one phone call." The silence in the room was suffocating. Evelyn looked at Thorne and saw the same fear and resignation that must have been in his eyes 7 years ago when he'd chosen to betray her. She understood now why he'd done it, understood the calculation, the impossible choice. She just wasn't willing to make the same decision. "No," she said quietly. Castellan turned to her. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You're not going to hurt those people. Because if you do, you'll have murdered innocent civilians on American soil. That's not something you can spin or bury. That's terrorism, and every federal agency in the country will come down on you like the wrath of God. You're willing to bet their lives on that? I'm betting that you're a calculating bastard who knows the difference between acceptable risk and suicide." Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. "You've gotten away with this for years because you're smart, because you operate in shadows and use leverage instead of violence when you can. Mass murder in an American city? That's not leverage. That's a declaration of war, and you'll lose." For the first time, Castellan looked uncertain. Evelyn pressed the advantage. "The documents are already public. The investigation is already launched. Killing us doesn't change that. All it does is prove guilt and create martyrs. You're smart enough to know that." She took a step closer. "So here's my counteroffer. You walk out of this hospital right now. You get on a plane. You run. Because in about 6 hours, when the FBI finishes processing the evidence I gave them, they're going to issue warrants. And every favor you're owed, every connection you have, won't be enough to save you." Castellan stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a genuine sound of surprised amusement. "You really believe that, don't you? You think justice wins. You think the system works." "I think the system works when people like me refuse to back down, when we make it more expensive to silence us than to let us speak." Evelyn pulled out her phone. "Jake, we have a problem." She'd been on an open line the entire time. Jake had heard everything. "Copy that." Jake's voice came through clearly. "Torres just called it in to FBI field office. Real agents are en route. ETA 10 minutes. Castellan's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Doctor." "Probably. But it's my mistake to make." As Evelyn looked at the gun one of his men was holding. "So what's it gonna be? You can shoot me right here in a hospital room with federal marshals and security cameras everywhere. You can try to escape before the FBI arrives. Or you can do the smart thing and cut your losses." The tension in the room was unbearable. Evelyn could see Castellan calculating, weighing options, trying to find an angle. His entire career had been built on making problems disappear, but she'd made herself too loud to silence quietly. Finally, he gestured to his men. "We're leaving." "Sir," one of them protested. "Now." Castellan walked to the door, then paused. "This isn't over, Dr. Ross. You've won a battle. But the war, that's just beginning. Bring it on." He left, his men following. The marshals outside immediately moved to pursue, but Evelyn stopped them. "Let them go. The FBI will pick them up. Right now, we need to secure this floor and make sure there are no other threats." Rodriguez looked shaken, but nodded. "You took a hell of a risk." "I didn't have a choice." Evelyn turned back to Thorne, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. "Are you okay? You called his bluff. He could have killed us." "He could have, but he didn't. Because men like Castellan survive by being smart, not reckless. And killing us would have been reckless." She checked his vitals, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "Your family needs protection, real protection. I'll make sure the FBI knows. Thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For finishing what I should have finished years ago." Thorne's voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry. For Afghanistan, for destroying your career, for being a coward." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I accept your apology. But that doesn't mean I forgive you. Not yet. Maybe someday." She adjusted his IV. "For now, you need to focus on healing. And when you're strong enough, you need to testify. You need to tell the truth, all of it, and you need to do it publicly. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can. I will." The FBI arrived 8 minutes later, actual agents this time, with proper credentials and serious expressions. They took statements, secured the ICU, and issued a bolo for Castellan and his men. Evelyn spent 2 hours being interviewed, walking them through everything from the initial surgery to the poisoning attempt to the confrontation that had just occurred. Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to the fake agent from before, was thorough and professional. Dr. Ross, I need you to understand that you're likely going to be called as a witness in multiple federal cases: fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. This is going to dominate your life for months, possibly years. I understand. You're also going to be a target. Castellan's not the only person who benefits from keeping this buried. There are powerful people implicated in those documents. I understand that too. Chen studied her. Why did you do this? You could have walked away. Let Thorne handle his own problems. Instead, you put yourself in the crosshairs. Evelyn thought about that. 7 years ago, I did the right thing and paid for it. I lost my career, my honor, everything I'd worked for. And I promised myself that if I ever got another chance to stand up against corruption and injustice, I wouldn't back down. This was that chance. Even if it cost you everything again? Even then, because some things are worth the cost. Chen nodded slowly. We're going to need you to stay somewhere safe for the next few days. Protective custody until we can assess the threat level. No, Evelyn shook her head. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not hiding. I have patients who need me, a job to do. If you want to station agents at my apartment or follow me around, fine, but I'm not disappearing. Dr. Ross, Agent Chen, I've spent 7 years being treated like I was insignificant, like I didn't matter. I'm done with that. I'm staying visible, staying present, and continuing to do my job. If that makes me a target, so be it. At least I'll be a target who's standing up. Chen smiled slightly. You're either very brave or very stubborn. Can it be both? By evening, the hospital had returned to something resembling normal operations. The fire damage was being assessed, patients were being redistributed, and the news vans outside had swelled from a handful to a small army. Evelyn's face was on television now, not as a disgraced former military doctor, but as the whistleblower who'd exposed massive defense contractor fraud. Sarah found her in the doctor's lounge, looking exhausted but relieved. Are you okay? I heard what happened with Castellan. I'm fine. Are you okay? Your apartment, FBI has agents there now. They said I should stay with family for a few days. Sarah sat down beside her. Dr. Ross, Evelyn, what you did today, standing up to those people, protecting all of us, that took courage I can't even imagine. It took anger, mostly, and stubbornness, and maybe a little bit of stupidity. Evelyn managed a tired smile. But thank you. For what? For believing in me. For supporting me when Chen and Brennan made my life hell. For being a friend when I needed one. She squeezed Sarah's hand. You didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did. Because you're a good doctor and a good person, and watching them treat you like garbage made me furious. Sarah's expression hardened. Speaking of which, Chen's been placed on administrative leave. Brennan, too. The board is investigating how they handled the poisoning attempt and the fire. Evelyn felt a grim satisfaction at that news. Good. They enabled this. Maybe not intentionally, but their willingness to look the other way created the environment where Castellan thought he could operate freely. At 7 p.m., Jake appeared with pizza and beer. Figured you hadn't eaten all day. You figured right. Evelyn grabbed a slice and bit in, realizing she was starving. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Jake spoke. Torres called. The raids on Meridian's offices found more evidence. Servers full of incriminating communications, financial records, even surveillance files on potential whistleblowers. He shook his head. Castellan's network is collapsing. People are flipping, making deals, trying to save themselves. And Castellan himself? Still in the wind, but every airport, every border crossing, every port is watching for him. He can't hide forever. He doesn't need forever, just long enough to disappear completely. Evelyn finished her slice. Men like him have contingency plans, false identities, money hidden offshore. He's probably already on a plane to somewhere without extradition. Maybe, but his empire is done. Meridian's stock has crashed, government contracts are being pulled, board members are resigning. Even if he escapes prosecution, he's lost everything he built. It's not enough. Evelyn surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. He threatened innocent people. He tried to kill Thorne. He's destroyed how many lives over the years? And he might just walk away. Justice isn't always clean, Jake said quietly. You know that. Sometimes the bad guys get away. Not this time. I won't accept that. Jake looked at her with concern. Evelyn, you've done everything you could. You exposed the corruption. You protected Thorne. You've given the FBI everything they need. Let them do their job. Their job should have been done years ago. The system failed in Afghanistan. It failed me. It's failed countless others. She stood, pacing. Castellan's right about one thing. The system is corruptible. Powerful people protect each other. Evidence gets buried. Investigations stall. And people like him count on that. So what are you going to do? Hunt him yourself? The question hung in the air. Evelyn didn't have an answer. She knew Jake was right. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to prosecutors and courts. But the thought of Castellan escaping, living comfortably somewhere while the people he'd destroyed struggled to rebuild, filled her with rage. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Dr. Ross? Castellan's voice smooth and unconcerned. I wanted to say goodbye. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She gestured to Jake, who immediately started trying to trace the call. Where are you? Somewhere safe. Somewhere your federal friends can't reach me. I'll admit you surprised me today. I didn't expect you to call my bluff so effectively. It wasn't a bluff. You would have lost. Perhaps, or perhaps I would have won and you'd all be dead. We'll never know now. He paused. I'm calling because I wanted you to understand something. You think you've won. You think justice has prevailed. But all you've really done is create a power vacuum. Meridian will be replaced. The contracts will be awarded to someone else. The corruption will continue, just with different names and faces. Maybe. But at least you won't be profiting from it. True. But neither will you profit from your Pyrrhic victory. You're a marked woman now, Doctor. Maybe not by me, I have more pressing concerns, but by the people whose names were in those documents. Senators, generals, people with resources and patience. They'll wait until the spotlight fades, and then they'll remember that you're the reason their careers ended. Let them come. I'm not afraid. You should be. Fear keeps people alive. Castellan's voice softened slightly. I'm going to give you some advice, Doctor. Not because I like you, but because I respect the play you made today. Get out of Millbrook City, change your name, disappear, because staying visible makes you a target, and eventually someone will take that shot. I'm not running, not from you, not from anyone. Then you're a fool, but a brave fool, I'll grant you that. He was quiet for a moment. Goodbye, Dr. Ross. I doubt we'll speak again. The line went dead. Jake looked up from his laptop, frustrated. Call bounced through 6 different countries, no way to trace it. Evelyn sat down, her hands shaking slightly. He's gone. Really gone. Are you okay? I don't know. He's right about one thing. This isn't over. The people implicated in those documents, they're not going to forget. She looked at Jake. I've made powerful enemies. You've also made powerful allies, the journalists who are covering this story, the FBI agents investigating the case, people like Torres and Webb who remember Afghanistan. You're not alone in this. I know, but that doesn't mean I'm safe. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling over them. Outside, night had fallen over Millbrook City. Somewhere out there, Castellan was escaping to whatever life he'd planned. The people he'd worked with were scrambling to cover their tracks or cut deals. And the machinery of justice was grinding slowly forward, picking through evidence and building cases. At 9 p.m., Evelyn checked on Thorne one last time. He was sleeping peacefully, his vitals stable, his color good. The marshals outside his door had been reinforced, 4 now instead of 2, all alert, all taking this seriously after Castellan's incursion. She stood at his bedside and thought about the man he'd been 7 years ago, the officer who'd valued his career over truth, who'd chosen compliance over courage. Looking at him now, she wondered if he understood the cost of that choice. Not just to her, but to himself. He'd lived with the guilt, the knowledge that he'd destroyed an innocent person to save his own skin. Maybe that was punishment enough. Maybe not. She honestly didn't know. What she did know was that he'd finally chosen differently, had finally decided that truth mattered more than comfort. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was something. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Agent Chen. "Dr. Ross, we have a situation. Castellan's plane was just identified landing in Sao Paulo. Brazil doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. We can request custody, but it's going to take time and diplomatic pressure. So he gets away. For now. But we're going to keep pressure on him, freeze his assets, work with international partners, make his life difficult." Chen paused. "I know this isn't the resolution you wanted." "No, it's not. But it's what we've got." Evelyn looked at Thorne's sleeping form. "What about the other people implicated in the documents? The senators and generals?" "Investigations are ongoing. Some will resign, some will be prosecuted. Some will probably escape consequences entirely. That's how these things work. The system isn't perfect." "It should be better." "I agree. But right now, it's what we have. And because of what you did, it's working better than it was yesterday." Chen's voice softened. "You should be proud, Dr. Ross. You exposed massive corruption. You protected a witness. You stood up to a man who spent 15 years making people disappear. That takes extraordinary courage." Evelyn didn't feel courageous. She felt exhausted, frustrated, and worried about all the things that could still go wrong. But she accepted the sentiment. "Thank you, Agent Chen. Get some rest. You've earned it." Rest sounded impossible, but Evelyn left the hospital anyway, letting Jake drive her home. FBI agents were stationed outside her apartment building, watching for threats. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it just reminded her that she was a target now. Inside her apartment, everything was exactly as she'd left it, which somehow made it feel foreign, like she'd been gone for weeks instead of 36 hours. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and tried to sleep. She couldn't. At 2 a.m., she gave up and went to her laptop. Started writing down everything that had happened, creating a detailed timeline with names and dates and evidence. If something happened to her, if Castellan or his allies decided to finish what they'd started, she wanted there to be a record. Jake had crashed on her couch and she could hear him snoring softly. It was comforting knowing she wasn't alone, that someone had her back. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. Thorne's name on the screen. She answered immediately, fearing the worst. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" "I'm fine. The marshals are here. I'm safe." He sounded tired but alert. "I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about everything. About what you said earlier." "Which part? About forgiveness? About how I need to testify? About doing the right thing?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've made a decision. Tomorrow, I'm calling a press conference. I'm going to tell everything, not just about Meridian and the fraud, but about Afghanistan, about the civilians, about what really happened and why you were court-martialed." Evelyn's breath caught. "Thorne, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I've been a coward for 7 years. I destroyed your life to save mine. The least I can do is tell the truth and let the world know what really happened." His voice strengthened. "Your discharge was unjust. Your court-martial was a sham. You saved lives and you were punished for it. That needs to be on record. It won't change anything. The discharge stands. The record is permanent. But the truth will be public, and maybe, eventually, someone will have the courage to overturn it, to give you back what was taken." He paused. "I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure people know what you sacrificed, what you fought for. That has to count for something." Evelyn felt tears burning in her eyes, the first she'd shed through this entire ordeal. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just finally doing what I should have done years ago." They talked for a few more minutes, working out details for the press conference. When she finally hung up, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Not that the system would work, not that justice would magically prevail, but hope that truth still mattered, that courage could still make a difference, that standing up, even when it cost everything, was worth it. She finally fell asleep on the couch next to Jake, exhausted but at peace. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Stone Ridge Memorial's main auditorium. News organizations from across the country sent crews. The hospital's board tried to shut it down, but federal agents made it clear this was happening with or without their cooperation. Evelyn stood backstage with Thorne, who'd been cleared by his medical team to leave the ICU for this event. He looked frail but determined, still in hospital scrubs, his chest bandaged under a borrowed shirt. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Absolutely certain. For the first time in 7 years, I know exactly what I need to do." He looked at her. "Will you stand with me when I tell them what happened?" "If you want me to." "I do. Because this isn't just my confession, it's your vindication." They walked onto the stage together, and the flash of cameras was blinding. Reporters shouted questions. The room buzzed with energy and anticipation. Thorne stepped up to the microphone, and gradually, the noise died down. "My name is General Marcus Thorne," he began, his voice clear and strong. "I'm here today to tell you the truth about several matters that have been covered up for too long. The first involves Meridian Defense Solutions and a conspiracy to defraud the American taxpayer of hundreds of millions of dollars. The second involves a cover-up in Afghanistan that destroyed the career of one of the finest officers I've ever served with." Evelyn stood beside him as he talked, laying out everything: the fraud, the bribes, the threats against his family. And then, his voice breaking slightly, he told the story of the Afghan compound, of the bad intelligence, of Evelyn's refusal to follow orders, of the civilians who lived because she'd stood her ground. "Dr. Evelyn Ross saved 23 innocent lives that day," Thorne said, looking directly at her. "And as a reward, she was court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, and stripped of everything she'd earned. I stood by and let it happen because I was afraid, because powerful people wanted the truth buried, and I didn't have the courage to fight them." The room was absolutely silent. "I'm here today to say that Dr. Ross's discharge was unjust. Her court-martial was fraudulent. She is a hero who was punished for doing the right thing, and I am formally requesting that the Department of Defense review her case and restore her rank and honor." He turned to face her fully. "Dr. Ross, I cannot undo the harm I've caused you, but I can tell the truth. And I can spend whatever time I have left making sure the world knows what you sacrificed." Evelyn stepped forward to the microphone, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, General Thorne. It takes courage to admit mistakes. It takes even more courage to try to fix them." The questions started immediately, reporters shouting over each other. But before Evelyn could answer any of them, the auditorium doors burst open. Castellan stood in the entrance, flanked by 4 armed men. "I'm afraid this press conference is over," he said calmly, and raised a weapon aimed directly at Thorne's chest. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Reporters screamed and dove for cover. Cameras crashed to the floor. Security personnel reached for weapons they weren't carrying in a civilian hospital. And Evelyn, operating on pure instinct honed from years in combat zones, threw herself in front of Thorne just as Castellan pulled the trigger. The shot never came. Instead, there was a sharp crack and Castellan's weapon flew from his hand, blood streaming from his fingers. FBI agents materialized from every entrance, a dozen of them, weapons drawn, moving with coordinated precision. They'd been waiting, hidden among the press corps, stationed in the hallways, ready for exactly this scenario. "Federal agents, weapons down! Now!" Castellan's men hesitated for exactly 2 seconds before dropping their guns and raising their hands. They were professionals, knew when a situation was unwinnable. But Castellan himself looked at the blood dripping from his shattered hand and smiled, actually smiled, like this was all going according to plan. "David Castellan," Agent Chen stepped forward, her weapon steady. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and about 15 other charges we're still cataloging. Get on the ground. Now." "I don't think so." Castellan's voice was conversational despite the blood. "You see, Agent Chen, I'm a very prepared man. And the moment you put me in custody, certain information gets released. Information about senators and their financial arrangements, information about generals and their offshore accounts, information about you, Agent Chen, and that internal affairs investigation from 2019 that got quietly buried." Chen's expression didn't change. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "It should. Because I've spent 15 years collecting insurance. Every dirty secret, every compromising photograph, every paper trail that powerful people wanted hidden. I have it all. And if I go to prison, it all becomes public. He looked around the room at the cameras still recording, at the reporters cautiously emerging from cover. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let me walk out of here. I'm going to disappear. And everyone gets to keep their secrets. No. Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. She stepped away from Thorne, moving toward Castellan with careful deliberation. That's not what's going to happen. Because your insurance policy is worthless. Castellan's smile faltered. Excuse me? You weren't in Brazil, that plane that supposedly landed in Sao Paulo? Decoy. You've been in Millbrook City the whole time, haven't you? Hiding, watching, waiting for your moment. Evelyn kept walking, and she could see confusion starting to cloud Castellan's confidence. You came here because you couldn't let this stand, couldn't let Thorne confess, couldn't let me win. Your ego wouldn't allow it. Dr. Ross, I strongly suggest you stop talking. Why? Because I'm right? Because you're not the cold, calculating operator you pretend to be? You're just another man who can't handle losing control. She was close now, close enough to see the fury building behind his eyes. You threatened to release secrets if you got arrested, but you already released them, didn't you? That's what you've been doing for the past 2 days while everyone thought you were fleeing the country, setting up dead man switches, automated releases, making sure that even if you disappeared, you could still hurt people. Agent Chen's radio crackled. Another agent's voice came through. Chen, we just got notification. Multiple data dumps hitting the internet. Encrypted files, thousands of them. It's Castellan's insurance files. They're going public right now. Castellan's face went white. That's impossible. Those files were supposed to... He stopped, realizing what Evelyn had done. Supposed to release only if you were captured or killed, Evelyn finished. But Jake found your servers last night, all 6 of them, hidden across the city in different locations. And we didn't shut them down. We just moved up the timetable. Everything you were threatening to expose, it's already public. Your leverage is gone. The silence was absolute. Castellan stared at her, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his expression. You don't understand what you've done. Those files contain information that will destroy careers, ruin reputations, expose corruption in the military and government. Evelyn nodded. I know exactly what they contain, and I don't care, because unlike you, I'm not interested in protecting powerful people who've done terrible things. I'm interested in the truth. The truth will tear apart. Good. Let it tear apart. Let every senator who took bribes face consequences. Let every general who falsified reports be court-martialed. Let the whole corrupt system burn, and maybe, just maybe, something better can rise from the ashes. She gestured to the FBI agents surrounding them. You built your power on secrets and fear. Well, now there are no secrets, and the only person who should be afraid is you. Castellan lunged at her, moving with desperate fury. But he was injured, exhausted, and surrounded. 3 FBI agents tackled him before he made it 2 steps. They forced him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back while he struggled and cursed. This isn't over, he shouted as they hauled him to his feet. You think you've won? You've just made enemies of everyone with real power. They'll destroy you. They can try. Evelyn's voice was calm, final. But I've already been destroyed once. I rebuilt, and I'll do it again if I have to. The difference is, this time I'm not alone. They dragged Castellan out of the auditorium, still shouting threats that nobody listened to. His men went quietly, professionals to the end, already calculating plea deals and cooperation agreements. Within minutes, the room was secure. The reporters, recovering from shock, immediately began shouting questions. But Agent Chen held up a hand. There will be a formal statement from the FBI within the hour. For now, this is an active crime scene. Everyone needs to evacuate in an orderly fashion. Evelyn helped Thorne back to his wheelchair. The exertion of the press conference and the subsequent chaos had exhausted him. His face was gray, his breathing labored. She checked his pulse, found it rapid but steady. You okay? She asked quietly. I will be. Thanks to you. He looked at her with something like awe. How did you know he'd come here? Because men like Castellan can't resist the spotlight. He spent 15 years operating in shadows, pulling strings, controlling narratives, having that power taken away, having someone like me, someone he considered beneath him, expose everything. His ego couldn't take it. He had to make a grand gesture, reassert dominance. She wheeled him toward the exit. I just made sure we were ready when he did. Jake appeared, looking relieved and exhausted. FBI found the last 2 servers. Everything's uploading. It's going to take weeks to sort through it all, but preliminary analysis shows, he whistled, 23 senators, 47 generals and admirals, hundreds of defense contractors. This is going to be the biggest scandal in decades. Good, Evelyn said simply. Back in the ICU, away from the cameras and chaos, Evelyn finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. Castellan was in custody. His network was being dismantled. The truth was public. But victory felt complicated. Sarah brought her coffee and sat beside her in the nurse's station. You did it. You actually did it. We did it. All of us. Evelyn sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. Those files Castellan had, they're going to destroy lives. Some of those people deserved it. Others were probably just caught up in systems they couldn't fight. It's going to be messy. Messy is better than corrupt. Maybe. I hope so. Over the next 48 hours, the story exploded across every media platform in the country. The Meridian scandal became the Meridian Pentagon scandal, then just the collapse as the full scope became clear. Senators resigned. Generals were relieved of command. The Secretary of Defense announced a comprehensive review of all active defense contracts, and in the middle of it all, Evelyn's name kept appearing. The doctor who'd exposed it, the whistleblower who'd stood up to Castellan, the former Army captain who'd been wrongfully discharged. Interview requests flooded in. She declined all of them. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about accountability. Dr. Chen, the hospital administrator, not the FBI agent, was fired by the board along with Brennan. The investigation into how they'd handled the poisoning attempt revealed a pattern of negligence and prioritization of hospital reputation over patient safety. Their replacements were announced within a week: Dr. Patricia Morrison, a trauma surgeon from Chicago, and James Whitfield, a hospital administrator with a reputation for integrity. Morrison's first act was to call Evelyn into her office. Dr. Ross, she said, gesturing to a chair, I've reviewed your personnel file, your caseload, your outcomes, your evaluations from nursing staff. I've also read about what you've been through these past few days. Evelyn sat, wary. She'd been through enough administrative meetings to know when something was coming. And I'm offering you the position of Chief of Trauma Surgery, Dr. Chen's replacement, full authority over the department, competitive salary, and the resources to build the program into something exceptional. Morrison leaned forward. You're one of the best trauma surgeons I've ever seen on paper. I want you leading this department. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. This was everything she'd worked for, the recognition she'd been denied. But another part, the part that had survived 7 years of being undervalued and overlooked, was cautious. What about the publicity? The scandal? I'm going to be testifying in federal trials for months. That's going to bring attention to the hospital. Let it bring attention. We'll be the hospital that stood up for what's right. The hospital where a doctor risked everything to expose corruption. That's the kind of attention I want. Morrison smiled. Dr. Ross, I've spent my career fighting institutional inertia and political cowardice. I'm not interested in hiding from controversy. I'm interested in doing good medicine and supporting physicians who have integrity. You've demonstrated more integrity than anyone I've ever met. I'd be honored to have you lead this department. Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Acceptance. Real acceptance, not grudging tolerance. I accept. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're going to have to rebuild the entire trauma program. Chen ran it into the ground, but I think you're up to the challenge. Evelyn stood, shaking Morrison's hand. I know I am. That evening, she visited Thorne in the ICU for what she knew would be one of their last conversations as doctor and patient. He was being transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center in the morning for continued care and protection during the upcoming trials. "I heard about your promotion," he said when she entered. "Congratulations." "Thank you. I heard you've been working with the Pentagon Inspector General. How's that going?" "Painful? Necessary." He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "They're opening a formal investigation into the Afghanistan incident, the court-martial, the discharge, all of it. With my testimony and the evidence, they're confident they can overturn your discharge and restore your rank." Evelyn sat down. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it when it comes through. Say you'll take back what was stolen from you." His voice was earnest. "It won't erase what happened, but it's a start." "I'm not sure I want it back. The discharge, the court-martial, they made me who I am now. They taught me things I needed to learn." She was quiet for a moment. "But I'll accept it. Not for me. For everyone else who's been wrongfully accused and didn't have the resources to fight back. Let my case be a precedent." "It will be. I'll make sure of it." They talked for another hour about the trials, the testimony, what came next. When Evelyn finally left, she felt something like closure. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Thorne had been a coward who'd found courage too late. That didn't erase his betrayal, but it counted for something. 3 weeks later, Evelyn stood in a federal courtroom watching Castellan's arraignment. He appeared in an orange jumpsuit, his usual confidence replaced with barely suppressed rage. The charges read out by the prosecutor took 10 minutes: conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, witness tampering, and dozens of others. His attorney, a high-priced lawyer from New York, tried to argue for bail. The judge denied it immediately. "Mr. Castellan, you have demonstrated a pattern of threatening witnesses, tampering with evidence, and attempting to flee prosecution. You are remanded to federal custody without bail pending trial." Castellan's eyes found Evelyn in the gallery. The hatred there was palpable. But so was the defeat. He was a man who'd built an empire on fear and control, and now he had neither. Outside the courthouse, Jake was waiting with Torres and Webb. They'd all taken leave to attend the arraignment to see this through to the end. "How does it feel?" Torres asked. "Satisfying, incomplete, complicated." Evelyn shrugged. "He's facing trial, but who knows if he'll actually be convicted. Powerful people still have ways of escaping consequences." "Not this time," Webb said firmly. "Too much public attention, too much evidence. The system can't bury this." Evelyn wanted to believe that. She'd seen enough to be cynical, but recent weeks had also shown her that sometimes, when enough people refused to back down, the system did work. The trials began in earnest 2 months later. Evelyn testified in 3 separate cases: Castellan's criminal trial, the Meridian corporate fraud case, and a congressional hearing on defense procurement. Each time, she told the truth clearly and without embellishment. Each time, she felt the weight of 7 years of silence finally lifting. The verdicts came in stages. Castellan was found guilty on 43 counts and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Meridian Defense Solutions filed for bankruptcy, its assets seized to pay restitution. 12 senators resigned or were censured. 8 generals were court-martialed. And in a small ceremony at the Pentagon, attended by only a handful of people, Evelyn's discharge was officially overturned. "Captain Evelyn Ross," the reviewing officer read from the order, "after comprehensive review of the facts surrounding your court-martial, this board finds that the charges were unsubstantiated. The proceedings were compromised by external influence, and your actions on the date in question were consistent with the highest traditions of military service. Your discharge is hereby changed to honorable. Your rank is restored, and a formal letter of commendation will be entered into your permanent record." Evelyn accepted the documents with steady hands. Thorne was there, recovering but present, his own testimony having been crucial to the review. Sarah had come too, and Jake, Torres, and Webb, the people who'd stood by her when it mattered. "How does it feel?" Thorne asked quietly afterward. "Like closing a chapter, a long, painful chapter." She looked at the documents. "But that's all it is. A chapter, not the whole story." "What's the next chapter?" "Building something better. The trauma program at Stone Ridge, mentoring young surgeons, making sure that when the next person faces an impossible choice between orders and conscience, they know they're not alone. She smiled slightly. And maybe, eventually, forgiveness. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but moving forward. Back at Stone Ridge Memorial, the trauma department was transforming. Evelyn had hired 3 new surgeons, all talented, all hungry to learn. She'd implemented new protocols, updated equipment, established training programs. The department that Chen had run into the ground was becoming one of the best in the region. Sarah had been promoted to nurse manager, overseeing the trauma team with the same compassion and competence she'd always shown. Together, they built a culture of excellence and integrity, the kind of environment where good medicine thrived. 6 months after Castellan's conviction, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Evelyn was finishing paperwork in her new office when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Dr. Ross. A voice she didn't recognize, female, professional. My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. We're doing a segment on defense contractor fraud in the Meridian case. We'd like to interview you. I've declined all interview requests. I know, but this is different. We're not interested in sensationalism. We want to tell the complete story. What happened in Afghanistan, the cover-up, how you exposed the corruption. We think it's important that people understand how one person's courage can change everything. Evelyn was quiet, considering. I'll need editorial approval. I won't participate if you're going to sensationalize this or make me into some kind of hero. I'm just a doctor who did what needed to be done. That's exactly the story we want to tell, the real one. They set up the interview for the following week. When the segment finally aired 2 months later, it was watched by 18 million people. It told the story from the beginning, the Afghan compound, the wrongful discharge, the rebuilding, the hospital, Thorne's arrival, the assassination attempts, the confrontation with Castellan. The response was overwhelming. Letters flooded in from veterans who'd faced similar situations, from whistleblowers who'd been punished for speaking truth, from people who'd been broken by systems that valued power over justice. Evelyn read them all, answered as many as she could, and realized that her story had become something larger than herself. It had become a reminder that integrity still mattered, that standing up was still possible, that one person could still make a difference. A year after the press conference, Evelyn stood in the same auditorium where Castellan had made his final stand. But this time, it was filled with medical students from the university, young people just starting their careers. You're going to face impossible choices, she told them. Situations where the right thing and the easy thing are completely different. Where doing your job correctly will put you at odds with authority. Where speaking up will cost you everything you've worked for. She paused, looking out at their eager faces. And when you face those moments, I want you to remember that integrity isn't convenient. Justice isn't easy. Doing the right thing often means sacrificing comfort, security, even your career. But it's still worth it. Because medicine isn't just about treating patients. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's about refusing to compromise your principles even when the cost is devastating. She told them about Afghanistan, about the court-martial, about the 7 years in the wilderness, and about how, when given another chance to stand up or stay silent, she'd chosen to stand. I lost everything once, she said. And I survived. I rebuilt. And when the moment came again, I was ready. Not because I'm special or heroic, but because I'd learned that some things matter more than career or comfort. The truth matters. Justice matters. Lives matter. The students gave her a standing ovation. Afterward, several approached with questions, with their own stories of facing ethical dilemmas, with gratitude for her honesty. One young woman, barely 25, waited until the others had left. Dr. Ross, I need your advice. I witnessed an attending surgeon making a serious mistake during a procedure. I reported it, and now I'm being told I'm not a team player, that I should have handled it differently. They're talking about holding me back a year. Evelyn looked at her, saw herself at that age, idealistic and scared and trying to do the right thing. What does your conscience tell you? That I did the right thing. That patient safety matters more than politics. Then trust that. It's going to be hard. You might face consequences, but you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror, and that's worth more than any career. She She squeezed the young woman's shoulder. And if you need support, if you need someone to advocate for you, call me. You're not alone. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. As Evelyn walked back to her office, she thought about how far she'd come. From a disgraced officer with a destroyed career to chief of trauma surgery at a major hospital. From someone who'd lost everything to someone who'd rebuilt from nothing. From victim to victor. But more than that, she'd become someone who could help others navigate the same impossible choices. Someone who could stand as proof that integrity survived, that courage mattered, that standing up, even when it cost everything, was still worth it. Her phone buzzed with the text from Thorne. Pentagon just announced comprehensive reforms to procurement oversight, new whistleblower protections, independent review boards. Your case made a difference. She smiled and texted back. Our case. You testified too, but you started it. You refused to back down. Everything else followed from that. Evelyn looked out her office window at Millbrook City spread below, at the hospital where she'd rebuilt her life, at the sky turning gold with sunset. She thought about the patients she'd saved, the students she'd taught, the system she'd helped change. And she thought about that moment in the Afghan compound 7 years ago when she'd refused to evacuate, refused to follow orders that would have killed innocent people. The moment that had cost her everything and set her on this path. She'd do it again in a heartbeat. Her office door opened and Sarah stuck her head in. Dr. Ross, we have an incoming trauma. MVA, multiple casualties. They're asking for you specifically. Evelyn grabbed her trauma bag and headed for the door. Let's go. As she ran toward the emergency bay, white coat flying behind her, surrounded by the team she'd built, rushing to save lives that needed saving, she felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Castellan was in prison, but appeals were ongoing. The reforms were happening, but resistance was fierce. Her own scars, physical and emotional, would never fully heal. But she was doing the work she was meant to do. Standing up for people who couldn't stand for themselves. Fighting for justice in a system that often failed. And this time, when the powerful tried to silence her, she had allies, resources, proof that courage could win. The trauma bay doors burst open and she stepped into organized chaos. Paramedics shouting vitals, nurses prepping equipment, patients bleeding and crying and fighting for life. Talk to me, Evelyn said, moving to the first gurney with practiced efficiency. What do we have? And as Sarah rattled off injuries and the team mobilized around her, Evelyn Ross, former Army captain, wrongfully discharged soldier, survivor, whistleblower, and now chief of trauma surgery, did what she did best. She saved lives, no matter the cost, no matter who tried to stop her. Because that's what integrity demanded. And she'd learned the hard way that integrity was worth everything. The trauma case was a family of 4, parents and 2 children, struck by a drunk driver running a red light. The mother had a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. The father had a crushed pelvis and compound fractures. The children, mercifully, had only minor injuries but were hysterical with fear. Evelyn moved through the chaos with the calm precision that had defined her career. She triaged quickly, assigned the father to another surgeon, took the mother herself, and had the children moved to pediatrics for observation and psychological support. Or 2 in 5 minutes, she told her team. Get me 4 units ready and call anesthesia. Sarah, stay with those kids until their grandparents arrive. Nobody should wake up alone and scared. The surgery took 3 hours. The mother's spleen was beyond saving, but Evelyn managed to repair the other damage and stop the bleeding. When she finally closed and the woman's vitals stabilized, exhaustion hit like a physical weight. But there was no time to rest. The father was still in surgery. The drunk driver, somehow uninjured, was being treated for minor abrasions and would face criminal charges. And in the waiting room, 2 terrified children needed to know their parents would survive. Evelyn found them with Sarah, both kids clutching stuffed animals that the pediatric nurses kept on hand for exactly these situations. Their grandmother had arrived and was holding them both, her face streaked with tears. Doctor? The grandmother asked, standing quickly. My daughter, my son-in-law. Your daughter is stable. The surgery went well. She'll need time to recover, but she's going to be okay. Evelyn knelt down to the children's eye level. Your mom is very strong. She's resting now, but she's going to be fine. And your dad is with another doctor who's taking very good care of him." The little girl, maybe 7 years old, looked at her with enormous eyes. "Can we see them?" "Soon. As soon as they wake up, I promise." Evelyn squeezed her hand gently. "You were both very brave today." Later, scrubbing out in the surgeon's lounge, Evelyn caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, more than tired, worn down by the accumulated weight of the past year. The trials, the testimony, the rebuilding. It had all taken a toll. But she also looked different than she had a year ago. There was confidence in her posture now, certainty. She'd proven to herself and the world that she could be broken and still come back stronger. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made her pause. Senate Armed Services Committee, invitation to testify. She opened it, scanning quickly. They wanted her to speak about military whistleblower protections, about reforming the court-martial system, about creating better oversight for defense contractors. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months from now in Washington. Evelyn stared at the email for a long moment, then replied with a single word: accepted. Over the next 3 months, she prepared meticulously, gathered data on wrongful discharges, interviewed other veterans who'd been punished for speaking up, compiled evidence of systemic failures in military justice. She worked with advocacy groups and legal experts, building a comprehensive case for reform. The hospital supported her completely. Morrison not only approved the time away, but helped coordinate her schedule so the trauma department wouldn't suffer from her absence. The new surgeon she'd hired proved capable and dedicated, ready to handle the load. Jake helped with the research, using his military contacts to gather information that wouldn't be publicly available. Torres and Webb contributed their own experiences, their own stories of times they'd seen good soldiers destroyed by corrupt leadership. And Thorne, now fully recovered and quietly retired from active duty, provided crucial insider perspective on how the system operated and where the vulnerabilities were. The night before the hearing, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stood on her apartment balcony looking out at Millbrook City, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From a battlefield in Afghanistan to a hospital trauma bay, from a destroyed career to chief of surgery, from victim to advocate. Sarah called just after midnight. Couldn't sleep either? No, keep thinking about tomorrow. What if I screw up? What if I can't make them understand? You will, because you always do. You're the most articulate person I know when you're talking about things that matter. Sarah's voice was warm with affection. And this matters more than anything. It does. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been where I was. Everyone who did the right thing and paid for it. Then tell them that. Tell them what it cost you. Tell them what it could have cost the world if you hadn't stood up. Sarah paused. And Evelyn? I'm proud of you. We all are. The Senate hearing room was imposing. High ceilings, marble columns, senators arranged in a semicircle like judges. Media packed the gallery. Cameras recorded everything. The weight of institutional power pressed down from all sides. Evelyn sat at the witness table in her military dress uniform, the one she'd earned the right to wear again after her discharge was overturned. Captain's bars gleamed on her shoulders. Ribbons decorated her chest, including the new commendation for her actions in Afghanistan. Senator Patricia Dawson, chair of the Armed Services Committee, called the hearing to order. Dr. Ross, or should I say Captain Ross, thank you for agreeing to testify today. Your experience is both unique and, unfortunately, representative of systemic failures we need to address. Evelyn leaned toward the microphone. Thank you, Senator. I'm honored to be here. Let's start at the beginning. Can you describe what happened in Afghanistan? The incident that led to your court-martial. Evelyn told the story again, but this time with 7 years of perspective and healing. She described the compound, the civilians, the bad intelligence, the order to evacuate and her refusal, the airstrike that was called off at the last second. 23 people lived that day because I disobeyed a direct order, she said clearly. Innocent civilians who would have been killed because someone wanted to cover up faulty intelligence and protect contracts worth billions of dollars. And your reward for saving those lives? Dishonorable discharge, court-martial, loss of rank, benefits, honor. I was labeled insubordinate, emotionally unstable, unfit for service. For 7 years I carried that mark. Couldn't get proper employment. Couldn't use my military experience. was treated like I'd committed a crime instead of prevented a massacre. Senator James Whitmore, known for his defense contractor ties, leaned forward. Captain Ross, with respect, military discipline requires following orders. How can we maintain chain of command if officers can simply decide which orders to follow? Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Senator, there's a difference between discipline and blind obedience. Military law recognizes that soldiers have a duty to refuse illegal or immoral orders. If I had followed that order, if I had evacuated and allowed that airstrike to proceed, I would have been complicit in the murder of innocent civilians. That's not discipline. That's a war crime. But you were not in a position to judge the intelligence. I was on the ground. I had eyes on the target. I knew there were no weapons, no combatants, only families. The intelligence was manufactured by people who wanted a specific outcome, regardless of the truth. And when I refused to go along with that, I became a problem that needed to be eliminated. She leaned forward. Senator, the system didn't fail accidentally. It was deliberately weaponized to punish integrity and protect corruption. That's what needs to change. The hearing continued for 3 hours. Evelyn presented her evidence, told other veterans' stories, outlined specific reforms that would protect whistleblowers and ensure that wrongful discharges could be quickly reviewed and overturned. Senator Dawson asked the final question. Captain Ross, if you could say one thing to other service members who find themselves facing similar impossible choices, what would it be? Evelyn thought about that 7-year-old version of herself standing in that Afghan compound, knowing her career was over but unable to do anything else. She thought about all the nights wondering if she'd made the right choice, if the cost had been worth it. I would tell them that doing the right thing will cost you, she said quietly. It might cost you your career, your reputation, years of your life. The system will try to break you. Powerful people will try to destroy you. And you will have moments where you wonder if you should have just stayed silent. She paused, her voice strengthening. But I would also tell them that integrity is not negotiable, that some things matter more than comfort or career, that the truth has power even when it seems buried, and that standing up, really standing up, accepting all the consequences, that's the only way change happens. You might fall, you might lose everything, but you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror, and eventually, if you're stubborn enough and lucky enough, the truth comes out. Justice, slow as it is, catches up. The gallery burst into applause. Senator Dawson had to gavel for order. But Evelyn saw tears on several senators' faces, saw recognition, understanding. 3 weeks later, the committee released their recommendations. Comprehensive reform of the military justice system. New whistleblower protections with real teeth. Independent review boards for all court-martials involving allegations of command influence. Mandatory investigations when intelligence failures lead to civilian casualties. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't fix everything. But it was a start. The legislation passed both houses of Congress 6 months later with overwhelming bipartisan support. The president signed it in a ceremony at the White House, and Evelyn was invited to attend. She stood in the East Room surrounded by other veterans who'd been wrongfully punished, other whistleblowers who'd paid terrible prices for speaking truth. When the president handed her the signing pen, his words were simple but meaningful. Thank you for your service. The real service, standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Back in Millbrook City, life continued. The trauma department thrived under Evelyn's leadership. Patient outcomes improved. Nursing satisfaction scores rose. The hospital became known as a place where good medicine and ethical practice went hand in hand. Chen, the hospital administrator who'd made her life hell, was never able to find comparable work after being fired. Last Evelyn heard, he was doing consulting work for a small rural hospital in another state. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a kind of distant acknowledgement that consequences eventually found everyone. Brennan had retired to Florida, his reputation destroyed. The board members who'd enabled the toxic culture were gradually replaced with people who actually cared about patient care over politics. Castellan's appeals were denied at every level. He remained in federal prison, his empire destroyed, his name synonymous with corruption. Evelyn testified at his sentencing hearing, and the judge thanked her for her courage before handing down 35 years without possibility of parole. You built an organization on fear and violence, the judge told Castellan. You threatened families, you attempted murder, you corrupted the very institutions meant to protect us. The sentence I'm imposing reflects not just your crimes, but the damage you've done to public trust. Castellan looked at Evelyn one last time as they led him away. She met his gaze calmly, feeling nothing. He was finished. His power was gone, and she had more important things to focus on than revenge. 1 year after the legislation passed, Evelyn received a call from the Pentagon. They wanted to create a new position, special advisor for military medical ethics, someone to review difficult cases, provide guidance on ethical dilemmas, advocate for medical personnel who faced pressure to compromise their principles. They wanted her. It would mean splitting time between Millbrook City and Washington, between surgery and advocacy, between saving individual lives and changing the system that affected thousands. She talked it over with her team, with Morrison, who was supportive but honest about the challenge of managing both roles, with Sarah, who reminded her that she'd always been at her best when fighting for something larger than herself, with Jake, who just smiled and said, "You've never been able to walk away from a fight. Why start now?" And with Thorne, who'd become an unlikely friend through their shared experience of speaking truth at terrible cost. "You've earned the right to rest," he told her over coffee at a cafe near the hospital. "No one would blame you for focusing on the work you love and letting someone else fight the bureaucracy." "But," Evelyn prompted, "but you're not someone who rests when there's work to be done, and this work matters. Those medical personnel facing impossible choices, they need someone who's been there, someone who survived it, someone who can tell them they're not crazy for refusing to compromise their principles." He smiled. "You're that person. You know it, and I know it." Evelyn accepted the position, restructured her schedule so she could do both jobs well, hired another talented trauma surgeon to help share the load at Stone Ridge, built a small team in Washington to support the advisory work. It was exhausting. It was demanding. It was exactly what she was meant to do. 2 years after Castellan's conviction, on a cold December morning, Evelyn stood at Arlington National Cemetery attending the funeral of Colonel Maria Santos, one of the 23 civilians she'd saved in Afghanistan. Santos had been 7 years old that day, hiding in her family's compound while her parents tried to explain to American soldiers that they weren't insurgents, just farmers. She'd grown up, joined the Army herself, served with distinction, and died in a training accident at age 29. Her family had asked Evelyn to speak at the service. "I met Maria when she was 7 years old," Evelyn told the assembled mourners. "She was terrified, hiding behind her mother, not understanding why soldiers with guns were surrounding her home. I didn't speak her language well, but I tried to tell her she was safe, that we wouldn't hurt her." She paused, looking at the flag-draped coffin. 7 years later, I was court-martialed for protecting her and 22 others. My career was destroyed. I lost everything I'd worked for. And there were moments, dark moments, when I wondered if it had been worth it, if saving those lives had been worth the cost to mine. Evelyn's voice strengthened. But then I would remember Maria's face, remember her growing up, getting educated, choosing to serve her adopted country, remember the life she lived, the people she touched, the difference she made. And I knew, absolutely knew, that it had been worth it, every moment of suffering, every loss, every hard year rebuilding, because Maria lived, because she got to become the incredible person she was meant to be, because one life, one single life, is worth any sacrifice. She looked out at the crowd, family, friends, fellow soldiers, and the other survivors from that compound, now adults with lives and families of their own. 23 people lived that day. They've gone on to become teachers, doctors, soldiers, parents. They've had children who've had children. They've built lives and contributed to their communities and made the world better by being in it. And when I'm asked if it was worth what it cost me, I think about them, about Maria. And I know the answer is yes, 1,000 times yes. After the service, Maria's mother approached her. They'd met several times over the years, maintaining contact through the advocacy groups that had supported Evelyn's fight for vindication. "She wanted to be like you," said Mrs. Santos said quietly. "Wanted to serve with honor, wanted to protect people. You gave her that chance, gave all of us that chance." Evelyn embraced her, both women crying for the loss and the gratitude and the complicated weight of survival. That evening, sitting in her Washington apartment with Jake, who'd relocated to help with the advisory work, Evelyn reflected on the journey. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "All of it. The stand you took, the years in the wilderness, the fight." "No." She didn't have to think about it. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that doing the right thing cost so much. I regret that the system failed so badly. But I don't regret the choice itself. Because the alternative, living with the knowledge that I'd let innocent people die to protect my career, that would have destroyed me more surely than any court-martial." "You're stronger than most people." "I'm more stubborn than most people. There's a difference." She smiled. "But yeah, maybe I'm strong too. I didn't used to think so. Used to think I was broken, damaged, less than. The discharge made me feel worthless. And now? Now I know that worth isn't determined by what institutions say about you. It's determined by what you do when everything is on the line, by the choices you make when it would be easier to look away." She looked at Jake. "I'm proud of who I became. Not despite what happened, but because of it. The breaking remade me into something harder to destroy." 3 years after the legislation passed, Evelyn was invited to speak at West Point to incoming cadets. She stood before 1,000 young people about to embark on military careers and told them the truth about service, sacrifice, and integrity. "You're going to be taught that following orders is paramount," she said. "And most of the time, that's absolutely correct. Military discipline saves lives. Chain of command exists for good reasons. But," she paused for emphasis, "there will come moments when the order is wrong, when following it would make you complicit in something unconscionable. And in those moments, you have to choose." She told them about Afghanistan, about the compound, about the choice that cost her everything and saved 23 lives. "They will try to make you afraid," she said, "afraid of losing your career, afraid of being labeled troublemaker or insubordinate, afraid of standing alone. And that fear is real. The consequences are real. I lost 7 years. I lost my rank, my honor, my livelihood. The system punished me for doing the right thing." A cadet raised her hand. "So what do we do? How do we make that choice?" Evelyn looked at her, saw herself at that age, idealistic and brave and not yet tested by impossible situations. "You ask yourself one question. Can I live with this? Can I look at myself in the mirror tomorrow, next week, 20 years from now, knowing what I did or didn't do? If the answer is no, if following that order will break something fundamental inside you, then you refuse. You stand up, you accept the consequences, and you trust that eventually truth wins." "Does it always win?" another cadet asked. "No," Evelyn admitted. "Sometimes bad people get away with terrible things. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes standing up costs everything and changes nothing. But," her voice strengthened, "the alternative is worse, because if good people always stay silent, if integrity always bends to convenience, if we never stand up because the cost is too high, then we've already lost. The system wins by making you believe you can't fight it. Prove them wrong." The cadets gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, several approached with questions, with thanks, with their own ethical dilemmas. Evelyn stayed for hours, talking with each one, offering what guidance she could. Because this, helping the next generation navigate the same impossible choices. This was why she'd survived. This was the purpose that had emerged from pain. 5 years after Castellan's conviction, Evelyn stood in a very different room, the Oval Office. The president wanted to present her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her advocacy work and her courage in exposing corruption. "Dr. Ross," the president said as cameras recorded the moment, "your actions have changed not just military culture, but our national conversation about integrity and whistleblower protection. You stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You fought back when it would have been safer to accept injustice. And you've dedicated yourself to ensuring that others don't face the same impossible choices alone. This medal represents our nation's gratitude for your service. The real service, the hard service, the service that costs everything and changes everything." As the medal was placed around her neck, Evelyn thought about that moment 7 years ago in the Afghan compound, about the scared captain who'd refused to evacuate, knowing her career was over, about the long years rebuilding, about Thorne's betrayal and eventual redemption, about Castellan's threats and downfall, about all the people, Sarah and Jake and Torres and Webb and countless others who'd stood with her when it mattered. She thought about Maria Santos and the 22 other people whose lives had created ripples across decades, about the reforms that would protect future whistleblowers, about the cadets she'd spoken to and the veterans she'd helped and the system she'd helped change. And she thought about the girl from rural Texas who'd joined the army wanting to make a difference, wanting to serve, wanting to heal. That girl had been tested in ways she could never have imagined, had been broken and rebuilt, had lost everything and found something stronger in the ruins. After the ceremony, Thorne was waiting outside. He'd been invited but had watched from the audience, giving her the spotlight she'd earned. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Surreal. Overwhelming." "Right." She touched the medal. "But also incomplete. Because medals and recognition are nice, but they don't change the fact that the system still fails people. That there are soldiers being punished right now for doing the right thing. That corruption still exists and whistleblowers still suffer. But less than before. Because of you. Because of all of us. You testified. Jake helped. Torres and Webb stood up. Sarah protected me. We did this together." She looked at him. "That's the real lesson. Standing up matters, but you can't do it alone. Change requires community, solidarity, people willing to support each other when the powerful try to divide and conquer." "I'm sorry," Thorne said quietly. "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry I wasn't that support for you 7 years ago. I'm sorry I chose fear over courage. I'm sorry I let them destroy you." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she'd never been able to say before. "I forgive you." Thorne's eyes widened with surprise and relief. "Thank you. You don't know what that means." "I do, actually. Because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I'm done carrying the anger. Done letting what you did 7 years ago take up space in my life. You've spent the past 5 years trying to make amends. You've testified, advocated, supported reforms. You've become someone different than the person who betrayed me." She smiled slightly. "So yeah, I forgive you. Not because you've earned it. You can't earn forgiveness. But because I'm choosing to let it go." They stood together in the winter sunshine, two people who'd traveled very different paths to the same destination, redemption through truth. That evening, back in Millbrook City, Evelyn had dinner with her team from the hospital. Sarah had organized it, a celebration with just the people who'd been there from the beginning. The nurses who'd supported her when Chen made her life hell. The surgical techs who'd worked extra hours. The residents she'd trained. Morrison, who'd given her the authority to build something extraordinary. To Dr. Ross, Sarah raised her glass. "The toughest, most principled, most infuriatingly stubborn person I've ever met. Thank you for showing us what real integrity looks like." "To standing up," Jake added, "even when it costs everything." "To truth," Morrison said, "and to building systems that deserve the people who work in them." Evelyn raised her own glass, looking around at the faces of people who'd become family. "To community, because none of us stand alone. We stand together." Later that night, alone in her apartment, Evelyn stood on her balcony looking out at the city she'd rebuilt her life in. She thought about the journey, from destroyed officer to vindicated whistleblower to respected surgeon to national advocate, about the losses and the victories, about the cost and the meaning. Her phone buzzed with messages from people who'd seen the medal ceremony. Congratulations from veterans she'd helped. Thank you notes from families of soldiers who'd been wrongfully accused. Messages from young officers facing ethical dilemmas who now had someone to turn to. Each message was a reminder that the pain had purpose, that the suffering had created something larger than herself, that standing up, really standing up, accepting all the consequences, had mattered. She thought about the 7-year-old version of herself who'd wanted to be a doctor, to help people, to make a difference. That girl had gotten her dream, but in ways she could never have anticipated. Not through easy success or traditional career paths, but through destruction and reconstruction. Through losing everything and discovering what really mattered. Evelyn pulled out her laptop and started writing. Not testimony or reports or advocacy materials, but a letter. To every person who'd ever faced an impossible choice between conscience and comfort. To every whistleblower who'd been punished for speaking truth. To every idealist who'd been broken by corrupt systems. She wrote about standing up and the cost of integrity, about losing everything and rebuilding from ruins, about the long journey from victim to survivor to advocate, about how change happens not through perfect heroes, but through ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. She wrote about Maria Santos and the 22 others whose lives had justified every sacrifice, about Thorne's redemption and the proof that people could change, about Castellan's downfall and the evidence that eventually consequences found everyone. And she wrote about hope, not naive optimism, but hard-earned faith that truth mattered, that courage inspired courage, that standing up, even when standing alone, created ripples that spread farther than anyone could predict. When she finished, hours later, she read it over once and then published it on her blog, the platform she'd created to share resources for whistleblowers and wrongfully accused service members. Within an hour, it had been shared 1,000 times. Within a day, 50,000. Within a week, it had reached millions of people across the world. People who'd been broken by systems that should have protected them. People who'd been punished for doing right. People who needed to know they weren't alone. The responses flooded in, stories of standing up and paying the price. Stories of corruption exposed and justice delayed. Stories of survival and rebuilding. Stories of people who'd read her words and found the courage to speak their own truth. Evelyn read them all, answered as many as she could, connected people with resources and advocates in each other, built a network of survivors who could support the next person facing an impossible choice. 6 months later, she gave a TED Talk that would be viewed by 30 million people. She stood on that stage and told her story one more time, not for recognition or fame, but because stories had power, because representation mattered, because knowing that someone else had survived the unsurvivable made survival possible. "I was destroyed for doing the right thing," she said to the audience and the cameras. "Absolutely destroyed. Lost my career, my rank, my identity. Spent 7 years rebuilding from nothing. And I won't lie to you, it was hell. There were nights I didn't think I'd survive, moments I wished I'd just stayed silent." She paused, letting that truth land. "But here's what I learned. Breaking doesn't mean broken. Destruction can be reconstruction, and the things that nearly kill us, if we survive them, they teach us what we're really made of. I learned I was made of something harder than I knew, something that could bend without breaking, could lose everything without losing itself." Her voice strengthened. So if you're out there right now, facing that impossible choice, if you're weighing your conscience against your career, if you're wondering whether speaking up is worth the cost, I want you to know this. It will cost you. It will cost you more than you can imagine. You might lose your job, your reputation, years of your life. The system will try to break you. Powerful people will try to destroy you. And there will be moments, dark moments, when you wonder if you made the right choice. She looked directly into the camera. But you'll survive. You'll rebuild. You'll find strength you didn't know you had. And eventually, if you're stubborn enough and lucky enough, truth wins. Justice catches up. And you'll look back on that moment when you stood up, when you refused to stay silent, when you chose integrity over comfort, and you'll know it was worth it. Every hard year, every loss, every sacrifice. Because some things matter more than easy lives. Truth matters. Justice matters. Lives matter. And the person you become by standing up for those things, that person is worth everything. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. 10 years after Afghanistan, Evelyn stood in that same compound, rebuilt now, a school where children learned instead of a place where they'd nearly died. She'd been invited by the Afghan diaspora community to see what had been built from the ashes of war. Maria Santos's younger siblings were teachers there. They showed her classrooms full of children, showed her the library funded by donations from people who'd heard the story, showed her the memorial wall with 23 names, the people who'd survived that day. "You gave us our lives," one of the teachers told her. "Everything we've built, everyone we've become, we owe it to you." "You don't owe me anything," Evelyn said. "You survived. You thrived. You made the choice to build something beautiful from something terrible. That's all you. But you made it possible. You stood up when others would have looked away. You sacrificed everything so we could have everything." Evelyn looked around at the school, at the children playing, at the future being built. And she knew, absolutely knew, that it had all been worth it. Every moment of suffering, every year in the wilderness, every hard fight and impossible choice, worth it. Because this, life continuing, children learning, hope thriving, this was what standing up created. Flying home, exhausted but at peace, Evelyn thought about the journey, about the captain she'd been and the doctor she'd become, about the system that had tried to break her and the community that had helped her rebuild, about Thorne's cowardice and redemption, about Castellan's empire and downfall, about all the people whose lives had been changed because one person refused to stay silent. She thought about the future, the work still to be done, the reforms still needed, the people still suffering. There would always be more fights, more impossible choices, more people who needed someone to stand with them. And she would be there, standing, fighting, refusing to back down, because that's who she was now, not a victim, not broken, not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she'd chosen to do with it. She was Evelyn Ross, former captain, current doctor, survivor, advocate, whistleblower. She was someone who'd been destroyed and rebuilt herself stronger. She was someone who knew that integrity wasn't negotiable and courage wasn't optional. She was someone who'd learned that standing up, really standing up, accepting all the consequences, was the only way to live with yourself. And she was done apologizing for it. Back in Millbrook City, back in her office at Stone Ridge Memorial, Evelyn looked at the medal on her wall beside her medical degree and her restored military commission. 3 pieces of paper and metal that represented 3 different chapters of one continuous story. The story of a person who'd refused to stay silent, who'd paid the price and survived it, who'd turned suffering into purpose, who'd proven that one person standing up could change everything. Her phone rang. Another veteran facing wrongful accusations, another whistleblower being punished, another person who needed to know they weren't alone. Evelyn answered. "This is Dr. Ross. Tell me what happened. We'll figure this out together." Because that's what survivors did. They stood up. They fought back. They refused to let the broken system break anyone else. And they won. Not always. Not easily. Not without cost. But they won. And that made all the difference.